An old man stood near a tree in the middle of the forest. A small child sat next to him. He recalls that one day his grandfather, who was called the best magician in the world, he said that he had reached the pinnacle of his magical skills. The grandfather turned to his grandson Igni and asked him to listen carefully. The little child asked his grandfather, puzzled, what he wanted to tell him. Then the grandfather, with strange enthusiasm, loudly told Igni that women love the strong, even frightening the child with his scream. Some time later, Igni was riding in a luxurious carriage pulled by 2 horses. Someone was actively calling his name while Igni was tiredly trying to open his eyes. Suddenly, Igni comes to his senses and is fully awake. He apologizes to his father for not hearing him because he dozed off during the ride. In response, Igni's father began to scold him, asking when he would start acting like the eldest son of the Lazurites. He also reminded Igni that today was his sorting ceremony. However, Igni's brother intervenes in the conversation and stands up for his brother. Frey asks not to scold him, saying that Igni studied until late yesterday and that is why he is so sleepy today. Father understands that Frey is protecting his brother, but he also says that at today's ceremony they both must be among the light mages, expressing their seriousness with their whole appearance. He makes it clear to his sons that things should not be any other way, and the sons agree with their father, not wanting to disappoint him. Igni and Frey arrive at the sorting ceremony, which is held among 12-year-olds. This ceremony determines each child's magical abilities. Igni and Frey belong to the Lazurite family, which wields light magic. Their grandfather, Cruz, is considered the best mage and is also quite the ladies' man. Igni was standing among the other teenagers, waiting for the sorting ceremony to begin, when suddenly someone ran up to him very quickly. Before Igni can react, a girl, Rosa, dressed in a cute, simple dress, runs up behind him and hugs him. She asks Igni with a happy smile if he is ready for the ceremony. Rose looks happy, eagerly awaiting her turn to be sorted. She cheers on her friend with a bright smile. Rose is from the Aquamarine family, water mages, and she is Igni's fiancée. Suddenly, someone shouts from the crowd that there is already someone with a B rank among the children, which greatly surprises Rose. These words make her even more worried. She says that B rank is very cool and confidently states that she is far from that level. Igni tries to cheer her up and calm her down, saying that he is sure that they will have a high rank too. Suddenly, it is Rose's turn to be sorted. She again begins to get terribly nervous and tremble and worry. Rose walks up to the stage in front of a crowd of other teenagers. She approaches a table where a glass ball sits on a small cushion. She is asked not to worry and to simply touch the ball. Having collected her thoughts and calmed down, Rose carefully extends her right hand towards the ball and lightly covers it with her palm. Suddenly, light starts to leak out of the ball and a magic circle appears around it. One of the ceremony leaders shockedly declares that Rose possesses S-rank monk magic. The people in dark robes standing at the front of the crowd shout that such a magician appears once in 100 years. They still can't believe it, but they also say that they will take care of Rose. She is frightened by the general excitement. A great commotion begins in the crowd. Everyone present is excited by what is happening, actively moving and pushing people around. After Rose, it's Frey's turn. He acts much more confident. After he puts his hand on the ball, the robed men claim that he has SS light magic. They also say that there have never been any light mages with such abilities. Everyone in the crowd is surprised, including Igni, who begins to worry, seeing how much talent his brother has. After this, the robed man calls the next person in line. It is Igni's turn. He is excited, bringing his hand closer to the glass ball, thinking that he will have the same incredible abilities as his brother. He is sure of it. After all, he is the eldest son of the Lazurite family. However, as soon as he puts his hand on the ball, nothing happens. No light comes out and no magic circle appears. After a few moments, Igni realized that nothing had happened. He continued to hold his hand on the ball, waiting in confusion for something to happen. Igni begins to feel the entire surface of the ball with both hands. The man in the robe loudly calls out the name of Igni Lazurite. After this, he states that he has F-rank fire magic. Igni cannot believe what he heard and his face is covered in cold sweat. Igni does not want to move away from the ball, not wanting to accept such an answer, but the organizers forcibly drive him away and call the next person in line. After 2 months, Igni decided to accept his fate. He began to study the basics of fire magic fireballs, but he was very bad at them. Full of despair, Igni decided that this was the end. Sitting on the bed in his room, he thought about Rose and how she was doing. Igni understood that they were of completely different ranks. He was a failure and she was an outstanding mage, and they had nothing in common anymore. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. On the other side of the door, they said that Igni's father was calling him. Igni comes to his father's office. He was waiting for his son and was clearly not in the best mood. He turns to his son, reminding him that Cruz, his grandfather, is not only the best light mage but also a success with women. After that, he calls Igni untalented. His face becomes increasingly hostile, and he says that it is hard to imagine a worse stain on his family's reputation. He then offers his son two options. He offers Igni either to remain at home for the rest of his life, or he will have to leave their home, giving up their family name. Igni listens to his father in silence, his lips trembling as if he is about to cry. Igni clenches his hand into a fist as his hands begin to tremble traitorously. He addresses his father but quickly corrects himself, addressing him as the head of the Lazurite family. Igni can't take it anymore and tears start to flow from his eyes. With great difficulty, he tells his father that he has decided to leave this house. After that, he silently leaves the office of the head of the Lazurite family. Igni walks slowly out of the mansion. He does not raise his eyes, looking down sadly. Suddenly, Frey, who was standing at the entrance, calls him. Igni did not notice him. Frey smiles and says that it has been a long time since they have seen each other, to which Igni apologizes and sadly states that he is no longer part of the Lazurite family. After hearing this, a small smile appears on Frey's face, and a moment later he begins to laugh loudly. Without pity in his voice, Frey says that he knew it would be like this, as Igni was always lazy and never bothered to study, while Frey himself was constantly busy with studying. He says that the gods see everything, hinting that Igni deserved this fate. Igni clearly didn't expect such words from his brother, who had always treated him well. He can't believe that his brother thinks that way about him, so he stutters and asks if Frey really thinks that way. He asks in response if Igni doesn't think the same thing, while he threateningly approaches his brother. Frey's smile disappears for a second. He raises his right hand and says that to Igni, he is Master Frey, calling his brother bad. As he says these words, he uses magic, causing Igni's body to instantly fall to the ground. Igni lies on the ground against his will, desperately trying to rise. He realizes that his brother most likely used magic on him. Frey's face takes on a malicious smile once again, and he mercilessly mocks his brother, feigning pity for him. He says that while Igni was idle, he managed to surpass his brother in everything. After this, Frey looks at his brother again with genuine disgust, saying that from this he is the heir of Lazurite. After this, he stops using magic on Igni and orders him to disappear. Igni finally gets up from the ground and then immediately runs away from the mansion, while his brother continues to laugh after him. Igni's face is frozen in fear, small tears are visible in his eyes, and he himself still could not believe what was happening. By running away from home without looking back, Igni was able to find a job that didn't involve magic cleaning sewers. He stood in the sewers, wearing cheap clothes, and cleaned the sewers with a shovel. Suddenly, bright beams of light appear from the end of the tunnel behind Igni, which greatly frightens the boy. He turns around and looks at the light, fascinated and confused. A figure shrouded in magic flies past Igni at incredible speed, but Igni manages to recognize it as his grandfather. Hearing a familiar voice, Cruz stops and turns his attention to his grandson. He greets Igni, calmly hovering above the water. Igni asks in surprise what his grandfather is doing in the sewers. He rubs the back of his head in embarrassment, saying that he is simply hiding from someone. Igni asks fearfully what his grandfather managed to do again. Then Cruz explains to his grandson that the owner of the house suddenly returned and he managed to rush to the toilet and was almost found. He continues his story, saying that he had to use magic to go down into the sewer. After this, Cruz asks in surprise what Igni is doing in the sewers. He is clearly not happy with this question. He looks away with hostility and says that he was kicked out of the house. Cruz does not understand the seriousness of the situation and jokes, asking if Igni was kicked out of the house in the same way he was just kicked out. He angrily shouts that he was really kicked out of the house. Igni desperately calls himself untalented and says that he will never be cool. Cruz listens attentively, after which he decides to test his grandson's abilities himself. A magic circle appears in front of him and Cruz sees that Igni has F-rank fire magic. He then asks Igni if he wants to become cool. He answers slightly hesitantly that this is now impossible. However, Cruz interrupts him and asks again, louder, whether he wants to become cool or not, slightly scaring Igni with his loud tone. Cruz's face takes on a frightening expression as he screams at his grandson that he needs to decide right now, to remain a wimp or to dive headfirst into the deep end. Igni looks at him slightly scared, noting to himself that his grandfather is very assertive. He is the best mage after all. Igni thinks about what he wants. He knows that he can't see Rose, and if this continues, he will be stuck in the sewers, and yet he doesn't want that. Igni collected his thoughts and, closing his eyes, a little hesitantly and loudly declared that he wanted to become cool. After that, he adds less enthusiastically that he is a weakling, to which Cruz replies that he is weak now, but his spirit is strong. He stands with his back to his grandson and wisely says that the whole point of being cool is that it is the strong guys who are popular. However, after this he looks at his grandson and adds that guys who try their best are much cooler. These words inspire Igni very much. His face no longer shows sadness and despair. Cruz says that since Igni has decided, they will go to training right now, after which he takes his grandson with one hand and flies out of the sewers. Together they fly high above the forest and head towards many mountains and cliffs. In the place they arrive at, there is a small sign warning people about a dangerous cliff. Arriving at the place, Cruz descends to the ground and also releases his grandson. Stepping onto the ground and looking around, Igni realizes with horror where they are. He fearfully asks his grandfather why he brought him to the Demon King's territory, since he himself said that Igni is still too weak. Cruz looks at him with incomprehension and says that the Demon King died several years ago. In response, Igni reminds him that the Demon King's remains still spawn monsters, which is why even strong guys don't want to go there. Cruz says that there is a reason why he chose this place. He tells Igni to try using his magic power. Igni asks in confusion if using his magic power will not cause him to become magically exhausted and die. Afterwards, Igni becomes scared when he thinks that his grandfather is just going to get rid of him right here. Cruz calmly replies that he has no reason to deceive Igni and reminds him that he wanted to be cool himself. Hearing his grandfather's words, Igni gathers his thoughts, clenches his fists, and concentrates. He then shouts that he will definitely become cool and then concentrates magic between his hands, forming a fireball. However, a moment later, he falls back exhausted and his fire gar falls to the ground and goes out. Igni feels tired, but immediately after that, he suddenly feels something strange. Igni immediately sits up and looks at himself in surprise, not believing that his magic has already been restored. Cruz then explains that the air in the Demon King's territory is filled with magical power, so the vessel is instantly filled with magic. After hearing the explanation, Igni looks at his grandfather with confusion, asking what benefit this will have for him. Cruz explains that overusing magic power is deadly, but the magic power limit can be increased and Igni will become stronger by doing this over and over again. Igni asks why they are doing this in the Demon King's territory. Then Cruz asks him to imagine a situation in which he, having gained strength, is sitting in a bar surrounded by women and booze, to the question of where he became so strong. Igni replies that he walked through the lands of the Demon King. Igni likes it. However, right after that, he tells his grandfather that even if he can become stronger, he will still only be able to throw fireballs. Cruz asks if Igni knows about the so-called single attribute specialization, or single elementers. He explains that those who can only use one attribute only need to gain greater magical power in return. Cruz says that they are the ones who can only use one element, but no one said that you can't become the strongest mage using one magic technique, and Cruz has been thinking about this for a long time. After this, he points to Igni and says that he is the one who will be called One Sister. At first, Igni looks like he is hesitant and does not like the idea. However, a moment later a smile appears on his face and he confidently says that this way he will definitely become super cool, already imagining how he will brag about his title and abilities to beauties. Cruz looks at his grandson with pride, mentally rejoicing that he was able to inspire Igni to action as he began to randomly create small fireballs. 2 years later, Igni stood in the Demon King's territory, surrounded by 3 giant spiders. They are about to attack, but Igni uses Fire Volley, instantly dealing with all the monsters. Cruz watches proudly as his grandson takes down the Hell Spider with one blow, but Igni confidently tells him that there is more to come. He shows his grandfather the huge skeleton of the defeated dragon, and he is slightly surprised that his grandson was able to defeat an SS-rank skeleton dragon. Igni asks if it's suitable for testing, then confidently says that if he could defeat such a monster alone, then he passed. Igni confidently says that now he can definitely become an adventurer, to which Cruz suddenly says that he will not become an adventurer. These words shock Igni. He asks in surprise why his grandfather decided so. After all, Igni worked so hard for this. Then Cruz reveals the truth with a sullen face, saying that among adventurers there are only men. He starts shaking with anger and even crying, saying that no romances will work there. He remembers his youth and asks his grandson not to repeat his mistakes. His reaction scares Igni a little. He falls to his knees and desperately asks his grandfather what he should do then, if not become an adventurer. However, Cruz assures him that everything is fine as he has thought of everything. He hands his grandson a piece of paper and tells him that this is where he should go next. Looking at the paper, he sees that it says something about the Ralmod Magic Academy, and Cruz explains that it is a pass to the exam. He leans over to his grandson and whispers in his ear that once upon a time this was a school for girls, but it is still 80% female. Igni gets the hint and a smile appears on his face. He happily realizes that his super popular life has finally begun. He excitedly asks when the exam will be, and Cruz replies that the exam is tomorrow. Igni clearly didn't expect such an answer, so he asks again in surprise, to which he receives the same answer. The bell outside was ringing loudly in the early morning. The important day of the entrance exam had arrived. Igni was lying in bed, clearly reluctant to wake up, despite the loud ringing of the bell. He turns over tiredly in bed and covers his face with the blanket, wondering why the bell is ringing today. A moment later, he sits up abruptly, remembering that today is the day of the entrance exam. Quickly getting ready, Igni starts running through the city streets as fast as he can. He knew he might not make it in time because he was already too late. He doesn't like that his grandfather announced the exam so suddenly. Of course, he didn't have to worry about paying for accommodation since he handed him a bag of money and told him that it was up to him from now on, but it was still too much for him. The Ralmod Magic Academy is the most prestigious educational institution in the entire kingdom of Antheim. Women have a greater predisposition to magical arts than physical ones, so the majority of students at this school are girls. Igni realizes that starting a harem while studying in such a place is not an impossible dream, and he will not miss this chance. Suddenly, something flies quickly over his head, and he looks up. A pretty girl in a big hat and short dress flies quickly above him on a broom. Raising his head up, Igni can catch a glimpse of what's under her skirt, but a piece of paper immediately falls on his face and covers his eyes. Igni quickly removes the paper from his face and, looking at it, sees that it is an exam pass, just like his. Igni realizes that the girl who dropped it is also an examinee who is late for an exam at the academy. After this, an idea comes to his mind, and he decides to use a fire volley. A girl flying on a broom suddenly hears an unfamiliar male voice asking if she has lost anything. Igni calmly glides through the air next to her, saying that he, like her, is heading to the Ralmod Magic Academy. The girl asks in fear who he is, as she did not expect to see someone at such a height. Igni introduces himself to the lady, states his name, and says that he is the same examinee as she is, while handing her the exam pass, returning it to its owner. After this, the girl looks at Igni and asks with interest how he moves through the air and suggests that he uses some kind of fire spell. Igni replies that it is a normal fireball. The girl is then surprised, since she knows that a fireball is not at all related to the type of air movement spells, and asks the young man not to joke like that. Igni changes the subject, reminding her that they need to hurry. Only then does the girl remember that she has no time to talk to him and is already preparing to fly away from him. However, Igni stops her, putting his hand on her shoulder, and offers her one way to get to the right place very quickly. The girl looks at him a little distrustfully. Igni continues, saying that at this rate they will both be late, so his offer seems very good. After thinking for a moment, the girl says that there is almost no time left, so she agrees. Igni politely apologizes. Igni easily and carefully picks up the girl while she holds her broom in her hands and asks her to hold on tight. The girl is terribly embarrassed by this situation and is a little lost. Igni decides to use a new spell he thought of just when he saw the girl. He He steps on his fireball and, pushing off with force, flies forward at incredible speed. At this time, it is already time for the exam at the academy. The organizers notice that there are still students who have not come up. However, time is up, so they are going to close the gate. However, before they can close the gates, a small explosion occurs on the academy grounds and a girl and a guy appear in its place. He says with relief that they barely made it in time. Igni stood proudly with the girl in his arms, calmly saying that they were both examinees and asked permission to enter. The girl in his arms was shaking and did not yet understand what was happening. The man asked if she was okay and if she had been kidnapped. He takes out a list of examinees and asks the boy and girl to identify themselves and show their exam passes. Igni introduces himself and shows his pass. The man then turns to the girl and asks her name. The girl takes hold of the brim of her hat. She carefully tilts it and slightly covers her face, after which she quietly says her first and last name, Alicia Esmeraldo, and shows her exam pass. The man finds their names on the list and says that they are both the last ones to arrive for the exam. He asks them to go forward to the academy grounds and that there will be a square where the exam will be held. On the way to the exam site, Igni notices that something is wrong with the girl. He asks what is wrong with her, and she shyly replies that she just doesn't like to stand out. Hearing this, Igni was surprised, after which he told Alicia that they most likely came in vain since they stood out too much, which clearly embarrassed Alicia. She agrees with Igni but also notes that thanks to this, she was not late for the exam. She blushed deeply and shyly thanked Igni for his help. Seeing her reaction, Igni suddenly realized something. He looked at Alicia in surprise, who looked away in embarrassment. Igni realized that she was a Dara and remembered that this was what his grandfather had told him. Igni strikes a cool pose and casually says that since she was in trouble, it was only natural for him to do so. She is not surprised by this and does not understand why he started talking so strangely. Igni and Alicia arrive together at the square where the exam will be held. The other examinees have already gathered at the square. The exam organizer says that he will now explain the exam tasks. Igni and Alicia are standing at the very back of the crowd. Alicia is happy that they made it just in time, clutching her broom to her. Igni clearly doesn't share her joy, a look of distaste on his face as he glances around the crowd of examinees. All he can think about is that more than half of the test takers are guys. He is clearly unhappy that this is different from what he heard. He starts to get angry when the thought occurs to him that his grandfather lied to him. Alicia notices his strange behavior and asks what happened. He comes to his senses and apologizes, saying that he was just thinking for a while. Igni notices that some of the examinees have stood in the fenced areas and started using magic. He asks in confusion what everyone is doing, and Alicia only sighs in resignation, realizing that he hasn't been listening to the explanation at all. There were several large wooden targets near one of the walls surrounding the square. Alicia says that the first test is a test of magical power, in which you need to hit the target with magic. She says that the criteria that will be evaluated here are magic technique, speed of response, and efficiency. Igni then asks if the targets will break if they are hit with all their might. Alicia then explains to him that these targets are made of a special material dispersing magical power, which makes it possible to resist magical attacks, so no matter how much strength he has, he will not be able to break them. Suddenly, the exam organizer calls examinee number 120 to begin the first test. This examinee turns out to be Igni, and Alicia wishes him luck. Igni goes behind the fence and stands in front of the targets. The examiner looks at his stats on the list. He sees that Igni has F-rank fire magic, and he thinks that Igni is trying to pass the exam just by luck. Igni concentrates and remembers his grandfather's words. He told him that the secret to being cool is that those who show off are cool. Igni is filled with determination to stand out as much as possible from the other students. Igni looks closely at the target in front of him, which, as stated earlier, cannot be broken in any way no matter how strong the magic is, and immediately understands what he will have to do. Igni decides to break the target. A small fireball appears in his palm, which instantly grows in size, and Igni immediately directs this fiery volley towards the small target. The fireball's collision with the wall resulted in a powerful explosion. After the smoke from the explosion clears, Alicia looks at the spot where the target stood and can't believe her eyes. All the examinees look in the same direction, their mouths open in surprise. Alicia and the others look at the place where the target stood, which Igni simply wiped into dust, leaving a giant hole in the wall from the fireball. While everyone is staring at the broken wall with their mouths open, Igni strikes a cool pose and starts smiling smugly. He strikes a pose, showing off in front of the girls, and is proud of the ladies' glowing eyes and his huge success. Igni happily realizes that if he continues to stand out so effectively, he will definitely become popular, when one of the examiners grabs him by the shoulder. He points his finger to the side, shaking, and says that Igni will continue the exam in a simulated battle. Igni looks at him with incomprehension, clearly not expecting such an outcome. Igni moves on to the next stage of the exam. He comes to a huge arena which had many doorways on top, but the arena was completely empty. There was no one there except Igni. He falls into despair and clutches his head when he realizes that in this way he will not be able to stand out in front of anyone. He desperately asks himself why this is happening to him. At this time, someone comes up to him from behind and asks if he is really the one who broke the targets, calling him a problem child. Igni turns around and sees a short, pretty girl with pointed ears and a friendly face. She introduces herself as the opener and unique, rarely seen in the whole world, Myra. She told Igni that she would be leading the next stage and that she was glad to meet him. Igni blushed slightly as he looked at her and remembered his grandfather's words about short girls being the best. Myra asked his name while Igni looked down at her. He didn't understand what his grandfather was talking about then, but now he did. However, he also thinks that it would be much better if she had bigger breasts, and even if his grandfather called his words heresy, for him it is better than nothing at all. Igni is brought out of his thoughts by Myra's words that they will soon begin the next stage of the exam. Igni then asks what the next stage is. Myra suddenly appears behind him and replies that the next stage is a fight with her. Igni instantly turns around and quickly takes a few steps away from her, and Myra admiringly praises his reaction. However, after this she says that the one who was able to destroy the targets cannot be an ordinary child, and since he can no longer be tested in the usual way, a training fight with a teacher has been organized especially for him. Myra explains the rules of the stage, saying that the winner is the one who can touch the opponent first. Igni says that it is quite simple. In response to this, Myra giggles and points out that he shouldn't say that at all, while a threatening smile appears on her face, which doesn't look nearly as friendly and innocent as before. Suddenly, she abruptly disappears from Igni's field of vision, but he manages to understand that Myra is about to appear behind his back again to try to touch him before he has time to notice her. He manages to dodge before the teacher appears behind him and almost touches him. Realizing that she is too close, Igni decides to use fire barrage. After a small explosion, a shock wave is created near him, causing Igni's body to fly to the side, instantly increasing the distance between him and his teacher. Myra clearly enjoyed the way her future student dodged the blast and decides to use something else to catch her student off guard. She summons magic bullets, after which a multitude of black fragments appear around Igni, flying towards him. Igni manages to use a fire volley which forms 3 fireballs that detonate all the bullets. An explosion in the arena causes smoke and dust to rise into the air, greatly reducing visibility. Seeing that Igni intercepted the bullets with fireballs, Myra is about to praise him, but he interrupts her, thanking her for something. Myra raises her head in surprise, looks at Igni standing in front of her with wide eyes, and realizes that Igni's left hand is touching her head, and he, in turn, casually informs her of his victory. He lightly runs his hand over the teacher's head, while voicing his assumptions that her magic is something from the category of spatial magic, like teleportation. Myra says he's right, but is surprised that he could even figure this out. Igni starts to stroke her head more actively, asking about his result, while Myra asks him to stop. Myra replies that he passed the exam, adding that his exam was already counted when he broke the targets. Igni is surprised and says that he could have been told about this earlier. However, Myra disagrees, saying that there will always be kids who won't put up with it. She asks why Igni wastes his energy on fireballs when he has SS rank fire and could use high rank spells. He turns away from her and explains that he has a rank F fire and can't use anything except fireballs. Myra doesn't believe his words and thinks he's joking. Igni says that he is telling the truth because he is a classmate and says it with all his pride. Myra looks at him with confusion and asks what this means, while Igni is happy that he passed the exam calmly and easily. Having successfully passed the exam, Igni finally entered the Ralmad Magic Academy and, like many students, settled into the dormitory. The long-awaited start of his new life had finally begun. Igni opened the door to his room in the boys' dormitory. He looked around the small, cozy room, which had 2 beds and a shared closet, noting that the rooms were for 2. Igni was not happy about this, since he does not really want to make friends with guys and therefore hopes that his neighbor will at least not be noisy. Igni looks around the part of the room that is filled with a huge amount of luggage belonging to his future roommate, in the form of an incredibly large number of bags and boxes, and he suddenly has a bad feeling. However, remembering that the dorm is free, he decides that poor people like him should be grateful. Igni suddenly remembers that the entrance ceremony is about to begin and hurries out of the room. He opens the door abruptly, causing him to accidentally hit a man passing by. Igni asks if he is okay, apologizing for opening the door so abruptly. However, looking at the man, Igni finally notices that the person in front of him is a girl, and a pretty one at that, with a fragile and pretty build and short blonde hair. She sheepishly hurried to assure him that she was fine. Igni then becomes more friendly and introduces himself, after which he asks the girl what her name is. The girl says with a smile that her name is Yuri and she also just got in and is glad to meet you. However, for some reason the girl refers to herself in the masculine gender. Igni is surprised at first, but then he finds it very cute. He remembers how he once asked his grandfather when he was a child if it was weird when girls talk like boys. Grandfather then replied that most women refer to themselves in the feminine gender and there is nothing wrong with someone speaking in the masculine gender. He also said that the inconsistency of behavior is great, which makes Igni very happy. Yuri suddenly takes Igni's hands and sweetly asks why they don't go to the entrance ceremony at the place. Igni freezes and becomes embarrassed when a woman's hand touches him. Yuri, without letting go of his new acquaintance's hand, leads him to the ceremony, while Igni thinks only about how soft a woman's hand is. Even after the ceremony, when Yuri had already let go of Igni's hand, he still happily remembers how warm and soft it was, while his hands trembled slightly. Igni is genuinely happy that he got into a magic school, while Yuri stands near the notice board to see what classes he and Igni got into. Yuri calls out to Igni and happily tells him that they are in the same class. However, when he looks at the board, he sees that Yuri is standing in front of the list for Class D, which he is clearly not happy about. He looks at the list in shock, where he is 4th from the top, and he was sure that he would be among the strongest. Yuri looks at him worriedly and asks what happened because he suddenly turned pale. After this, Yuri suddenly asks in fear if Igni reacted that way because he was disgusted by the idea of being in the same class with Yuri. Igni quickly assures her that this is not the case at all. Sometime later, Igni meets Alicia outside, who tells him that the classes will be reformed next year. She floats above the ground on her broom and suggests that Igni is so upset about being placed in Class D because he tried to put himself in a bad light in front of everyone. Igni continues to try to look cool in front of her and says with a pompous face that they haven't seen each other for a long time, and Alicia comes down to the ground and asks him to stop with his playboy behavior. After that, she says with a smile that she is also in Class D and she will be counting on him. Yuri, who is standing next to them, is happy that Alicia will also be in Class D and says with a smile that she is glad to meet him. Alicia immediately pounces on Yuri, calling her cute and comparing her to a fairy. She asks Igni with interest where he met such a cute child, while also being touched by the fact that Yuri refers to himself in the masculine gender. Alicia compliments Yuri's short haircut, comparing him to a small animal, and Yuri sheepishly asks her to stop, as at this rate they might be late for the entrance ceremony. The three arrive at the auditorium where the commencement ceremony was held. One of the teachers gives a speech, telling the audience to be proud to be called Rollman students. Myra stands nearby, yawning tiredly, while another teacher says that although the students' training will only last 3 years, they will eagerly await the success of their students. After the entrance ceremony ended, Yuri stood up and stretched tiredly, complaining that the principal's speech was too long. However, Igni doesn't think so at all. He sat on the bench with his head down and thought only about the fact that during the entire director's speech, he didn't even have time to remember the faces of all the girls present. Suddenly, he notices that all the students are collectively leaving somewhere. He asks Alicia in confusion where everyone is going, and she replies that Igni must have missed everything again. The headmistress approaches them and, bending down, explains with a smile that after everyone goes to class, everything will be explained to them in more detail. She also says that they can take absolutely any seat they like. After that, she leaves, and Alicia smiles and notes how kind this teacher is. However, Igni only noticed her body and glasses. He remembers how, as a child, he told his grandfather that glasses were evil and that cute girls didn't need glasses at all. In response to this, the grandfather unexpectedly slapped him with all his might. Igni fell to the floor from this. Holding his cheek, he asked with complete bewilderment and indignation why this happened to him, to which the grandfather replied that Igni was still young. But it's still ignorant to criticize something you don't understand. Remembering this situation, Igni understands that glasses are usually just trifles and that Grandpa said everything right then. Alicia says that it's time for them to go to class. Yuri, Alicia, and Igni enter the classroom and sit down in their chosen seats. Igni and Yuri sit next to each other and Alicia sits in front of them. She turns around and asks Yuri what his attribute is. She replies that her attribute is darkness, which surprises Alicia greatly. She also asks what Yuri's specialty is, to which she very hesitantly replies that it is support. Igni thinks that Yuri probably doesn't want to talk about it. He decides to ask Alicia about her powers, to which she replies that she has wind, which is why she is so good at both sew and support. Igni then suggests that she hopes to become a master of magic. Alicia becomes uncomfortable and says that she has a very specific family, so she can't decide who she wants to become. Igni goes silent and all three of them feel how heavy the atmosphere has become. He decides to change the subject by saying that he has fire and is the best at fireballs. Someone in the class overhears his words and clearly doesn't like them. A young boy named Edward expresses his dissatisfaction with the fact that Igni came to this academy, and a guy with dark hair standing next to him says that this is the same guy with the F-rank fire. Edward says with displeasure that there were already rumors that even the lowest-ranking ones had entered this year, but he still asks Igni with displeasure why he came to the academy at all. Alicia can't stand their rudeness and decides to stand up for her friend, saying that Igni passed the exam, proving his abilities, which she saw with her own eyes, which means he can't have an F rank. However, Igni calmly tells her that he really does have F rank fire, which shocks Alicia. The dark-haired boy then states with complete confidence that Igni cheated on the exam. Igni doesn't get angry but just calmly reminds them that this school values strength, to which Edward wants to answer him something, but their argument is interrupted by the teacher, clapping his hands to get the students' attention. In front of them stands the teacher who gave the speech at the entrance ceremony. She introduces herself with a smile, saying that she is the homeroom teacher of the first class D, Alina. Her attribute is life and her rank is B, the lowest of all. The other students are surprised by this, and Alicia says that Ralmod Academy is a world-class school, and she heard that there are teachers of S rank and even SS rank, and Alina is a teacher with B rank. After that, she confidently says that this teacher is a monster. Alina sadly says that she is scared by how her students' faces changed after her words, but she understands that if she had not said this right away, they would have gotten angry. After this, Alina asks for silence in the classroom and says that she will tell them the most important rules of the academy. She says that, as Igni said earlier, this school values ability, the strong are right, the weak are wrong. The overwhelming aura of these words frightens some of the students, and she continues by saying that, in her opinion, those present here are strong enough, but she also asks them not to stop there and become even stronger. After these words, Alina says that she needs to mark those present. All the students were present, and finally Alina asks if any of the students have questions, and one of them raises his hand. Alina looks at the student and tries to remember her name with slight uncertainty. She stands up from her seat and says her name, Iris, and also states her attribute Earth, rank S. Iris asks the teacher if she will be ranked higher than Alina if she can defeat the teacher in combat. Alina thoughtfully replies that she will, but then asks Iris if she knows why she won't be able to do so. Elinor comes very close to the student and says that Iris will not be able to defeat her since she is stronger. While she uses magic on the student, several small balls fly out of her hands, which land on Iris. After this, Iris suddenly looks at her silently with wide eyes, after which she just as silently sits back down in her seat, nothing left of her previous confidence. She looks scared, her eyes seem to have lost their life. She just stares at one point and does not move, and the rest of the students look at her with concern. Elinor asks if everyone in the class understood her words. After this, she turns to face the class and says that the experience is very important, but they will definitely return to this topic later, and if none of the students have any more questions, their first lesson will be over. Finally, Elinor tells the students that she is ready to accept the challenge at any time. After these words, she immediately adds that she will not be able to accept the challenge only during working hours. After that, she says goodbye to the students and leaves the class. After that, all the students also slowly start to gather and leave the classroom. Igni quickly gets up from her seat while Yuri is in no hurry to get up. She looks at him and offers to go back together. However, Igni tells her with a serious face that they must help Iris urgently. Yuri does not quite understand what he means. Igni explains to her that when the teacher approached Iris, he saw her send spores to her. Inside the human body they grow and multiply very quickly, and later they will be much more difficult to extract. Iris is still sitting in her place, motionless, with the same empty look, and Igni says that she is weaker than the teacher assumed, so she will not be able to return from this state on her own. Afterwards, Igni explains that in order to help Iris, they need to help her drink a large amount of water so that she can cough up the spores. Igni asks Yuri to help him, to which she immediately agrees. They are also joined by Alicia, who helps them bring Iris to the fountain and give her some water. Afterwards, Igni helps her bend down and tells her to spit out the spores. After a few coughs, Iris finally spits out the spores, which come out in a long black clot. She falls to her knees, exhausted, and Igni asks her how she feels, worried. After coming to her senses, Iris begins to cry and says that she only remembers how everything went black before her eyes. After that, she rushes into Igni's arms in tears, saying how scared she was. After some time, Iris comes to her senses and walks with her 3 new friends. Yuri is happy to learn that Iris also lives in the dorm. Iris is also very happy that Igni lives in the dorm. Alicia looks at the guy and sees that Igni is in a slightly bad mood. She doesn't understand why he is not in the mood and says that he, on the contrary, should be happy. However, Igni only thinks that he imagined that Iris would be surprised by his courage and knowledge and would definitely fall in love with him after he saved her. But in reality, she bowed at his feet, saying that she was grateful to him for the rest of her life. At this time, Iris, blushing, cuddles up to Igni and with a loving look says that she envies the one who lives with him in the same room, since she, too, would not mind living with him. After her words, Igni suddenly remembers that he was never able to find out who he was sharing a room with in the dorm, and all because he spent all his time in this flower garden, surrounded exclusively by girls. He is brought out of his obsessive thoughts by Iris, who tugs at the edge of his sleeve and calls him. She looks at Alicia and Yuri with slight hostility and asks Igni when he met them. Igni begins to remember and briefly, without going into details, answers that he met Alicia on the day of the entrance exam, and he accidentally ran into Yuri near the dorm room. After these words, Igni suddenly realizes something. Apparently, only now he suddenly realized that the first time he met Yuri was on the territory of the male dormitory, despite the fact that Yuri is a girl. By this time, all 3 of them are already approaching the dorm, and then Yuri takes Igni's hand and pulls him towards the dorm. He says that it's time for them to go to the dorm, while not forgetting to say goodbye to everyone else. Iris is indignant that Yuri is standing too close to Igni and asks why he even needs to go to the boys' dorm. Yuri only laughs in response to this and does not understand what Iris is talking about, since Yuri is a guy. Iris and Alicia gape in shock as Igni is about to faint. Yuri doesn't understand their reaction, as it should be obvious since he shares a room with Igni. Iris screams in fear that Igni has fainted. In front of Igni are Elinor, Alicia, and Yuri, all wearing swimsuits. Elinor coquettishly asks if he wants to play with Sensei. Alicia asks more confidently, and Yuri is acting rather modestly, slightly covering his body. Igni watches this with genuine pleasure, although he understands perfectly well that forcing girls to fight for himself is a sin for a man. At the same time, he continues to look at the girls with undisguised pleasure. However, Igni's sleep is interrupted when he hears a voice calling his name. Opening his eyes tiredly, he dimly sees the silhouette of a very pretty girl in front of him. Opening his eyes, he clearly sees Yuri in front of him, who has been desperately trying to wake him up all this time, hanging over him. Igni has not fully woken up yet, so he sits up abruptly because he thinks that there is a girl in front of him. However, a second later, memories of yesterday come to him. Yuri, already dressed in his school uniform, sat on his bed, waiting for Igni to get ready. He says that he was scared when he woke up and asks him to get ready quickly. Igni goes to the closet and puts on his uniform. All he can think about is how someone as cute as Yuri could be a guy. He even admits that he is actually a girl disguised as a guy. While Igni is packing, Yuri asks if his luggage is too small since he only brought one small bag. He replies that it just happened that way. Igni decides to ask Yuri if all of that huge pile of things is his. Yuri is a little awkward, but he explains that when he said he was accepted into the academy, the villagers collected all these things for him because of his talent. After all, he is the first male mage in their village. After these words, Igni sits down on the bed and lowers his head, saying that Yuri must really be a guy, completely desperate. Yuri does not understand his words and asks him to stop saying strange things so that they can finally go to class. Class D arrives at a large arena that was apparently used for battles. They are informed that it will be a group class, and someone says that it is their first time attending a class for practice. From the crowd of students, a hand can be seen, and a female voice greets the students of Class 1D. It is Myra, trying to somehow stand out among the students who are taller than her. Myra jumps up and waves to Igni, greeting him and asking how he is feeling. He casually replies that Sensei is the one in the most fighting spirit, and again begins to stroke Myra's head, while she tiredly asks him to stop. Alicia approaches the teacher and happily says that she wants to pet her head too, and Yuri joins in, saying that it's the first time he's seen an elf. Myra feels awkward and reminds them that she is, after all, their teacher. She turns her attention to the other students and announces to the entire class that they will have a practical combat lesson today, but does not have time to say who their opponents will be. Because Myra notices that their opponents have just entered the classroom for practice. In front of the crowd of students, one of them confidently walks ahead. A crowd of students approaches the teacher. A girl with long dark hair and a sword hanging on her belt walks confidently in front of them. She asks the teacher for forgiveness for being late and says that they were held up in the previous lesson. Myra greets Class 1C. Alicia is about to ask who the girl is, but Igni doesn't let her finish the question and answers right away, saying that she is the magical swordsman Alina Orate, and she won first place this year. Alicia looks at Alina and sees the sword on her belt. She doesn't understand why she is allowed to use a sword in a magic academy. Myra then explains to her that magic swordsmen fight by combining magic and swordsmanship, so they cannot do without weapons, and if they do not find the right balance, nothing will work. Alicia then suggests that swordsmen are strong. After this, Myra turns to the class and says that since the students of both classes are gathered, they can begin. She asks the students to first break into groups of 2. Iris immediately pays attention to her words. At that very moment, someone grabs Igni's sleeve tightly, clearly not wanting to let go. Iris literally hugs Igni's hand, immediately shouting that she will be in the group with him, obviously not wanting to give in to anyone. Iris continues to hold his hand, looking at Igni with loving eyes. Yuri turns to Alicia and offers to be in the same group with him. Alicia agrees, looking at Iris and calling this picture creepy. However, despite Iris's efforts, Myra decides that Igni will be in Alina's group, which surprises all 3 of them, especially Iris and Alina, who responds to these words with a look full of hostility. Myra asks them to remember that the main thing is that this is a one-on-one practical fight, so it will continue until one of them accepts defeat or Myra herself stops it. After that, she asks if the students have any questions. Igni is about to say that he has no questions, but Alina interrupts him unceremoniously, saying that she has a question. She asks with a very displeased face why on earth she should fight this guy, meaning Igni. Myra casually replies that she simply thought that if she and Igni fought first, they would surely inspire the others with their fight. Alina mockingly replies that she would defeat Igni in an instant. In response to Myra, with a more serious expression on her face and tone, she says that she knows perfectly well about Alina's development. but it would be better for her to learn to correctly assess the opponent's abilities. Myra adds that otherwise Alina will join the ranks of students who died during their studies. The mention of death greatly frightens Yuri, and the others listen attentively to the teacher. Alina does not give up and with some disgust, as if her pride was hurt, asks the teacher if this guy is stronger than her. Myra looks at her with a smile. She replies that she didn't say that Igni is stronger than her, but since Alina is so confident in herself, Myra suggests introducing a penalty for the loser. For example, the loser will obey the winner in everything for a month. Igni is about to tell the teacher that he does not want to fight the girl with all his strength, but his words immediately make Alina angry. She loudly and confidently states that the very idea of her losing is simply ridiculous, and she decides to accept the teacher's offer, telling Igni that if he loses, he will become a slave of Class C for a month. Yuri, looking at everything that is happening, begins to worry terribly and says that they need to stop them, otherwise Igni will die. Iris agrees with him since she knows that Igni's opponent is the eldest daughter of the Orate family. Hearing these words, Igni remembers that the Orate family, like his family, is known for its high ranks. He looks at Alina, full of rage and ready to attack at any moment, and understands that this is probably why she has so much pride. Suddenly, a familiar voice from the crowd of students excitedly shouts at Igni to stop immediately. It turns out to be Edward who, trembling all over, says that Igni only has a rank F fire and he can replace him. His friend tells Igni to be grateful for Edward's mercy, and Igni says that he worries more about him. After all, he is good. Despite their words, Igni confidently stands before his opponent. He recalls his earlier words about how strength is valued in this school. Igni stands confidently in front of Alina, telling everyone who is worried about him that they don't have to worry. The students of Class C start whispering about how Igni is an F rank, how he even got into the academy and thinks he can beat Alina. Alina prepares for battle, placing her hands on her scabbard while apologizing for their class being so noisy, clearly mocking Igni, who could hear what they were discussing. He replies that it doesn't matter to him. A menacing smile appears on Alina's face as she already anticipates victory. She says that Igni seems to be very confident in himself. He himself mentally answers Alina, saying that coolness must be shown despite adversity. Then Alina says that in that case she cannot stand on ceremony with Igni, and he confidently replies that this suits him. Myra raises her hand, calling for the fighters to prepare for battle. Alina gets into a fighting stance, ready to draw her sword from its sheath at any moment. Igni, on the other hand, stood completely calm, being absolutely confident in his abilities. A couple of seconds pass and Myra lowers her hand with a whistle, allowing the fight to begin. At the same second, Alina tries to pull out her sword, but something is stopping her. Surprise and a hint of fear appear on her face. Alina suddenly realizes that she cannot move her arm, which prevents her from drawing her sword in any way and attacking her opponent. These few moments of numbness are enough, and Igni suddenly appears in front of Alina's face, covering with his hand the hand of Alina, which reached out to grab the sword by the hilt. At the same moment, her eyes widen in fear and realization of the situation. She still can't move, but she sees several fireballs around her, tightly surrounding her in a ring. Igni, without letting go of her hand, says with a confident smile that if you need to fight a magical swordsman, you just need to not let him draw his sword. After a moment, Myra loudly declares that this is enough, raising her hand into the air, thus declaring the end of the battle. After this, Myra approaches Alina and, with a relieved look, wants to tell her that she really should learn to evaluate her opponent, but she doesn't have time to finish. Alina doesn't want to listen to her, but instead of getting angry, she, completely unexpectedly for everyone, runs away in tears, calling the teacher's words idiocy. At first, Igni is simply surprised by such a reaction, but he suddenly remembers his grandfather's words that if a girl runs away from him in tears, then he is obliged to catch up with her. After this, Igni immediately comes to his senses and decides to follow Alina as soon as possible, warning Myra about this. After some time of searching, Igni finally finds Alina. She is sitting on the ground, leaning against a column and hugging her knees. She has lowered her face so that it cannot be seen. Hearing a familiar voice asking if she's okay, she silently understands her head. Alina turns her head to Igni and confidently says that she's not crying at all. She tells Igni that the class hierarchy is based on a person's strength, and in their class, Alina is the strongest student. and today she lost for the first time without even having time to draw her sword from its sheath. She starts crying, saying that she was drunk on her power, and since she came in first place in the entrance exam, she had to maintain her reputation. She says that since she came in first place, she should have been first. Alina breaks down and starts crying again, tears streaming from her eyes. She desperately asks why everything turned out this way if she was supposed to be the best. Igni sees how upset she is. He feels a little awkward because he is not quite sure how to calm her down. The thought comes to him that at this moment he should hug her, but he manages to stop himself because he remembers something. He remembers how during one of his training sessions with his grandfather, he asked Igni what he should do if he needed to calm a girl down. Igni confidently replies that he will hug the girl tightly and quietly whisper in her ear that everything will be fine to calm her down. However, the grandfather is clearly not satisfied with his answer because he immediately slaps his friend, calling his words disgusting since there is always a reason for girls' tears. He explains with great enthusiasm to his inexperienced grandson that in such a situation he will have to listen to her problem and then find a solution for it. Then Igni tries to come up with a solution to Alina's problem. He realizes that Alina was trying to show herself as the strongest and then decides what words would be best to say. He tells Alina that of all the people he has fought so far, she is the strongest. As soon as Alina heard these words, her tear-stained face lit up, all the sadness and despair disappeared from her face. She is silent for a while, after which, hesitantly, slightly stumbling, she asks if this is true. To this question, Igni immediately answers with complete confidence that it is indeed true. Igni decides not to stop there. He continues to compliment Alina, saying that she is also the most beautiful, the strongest, and the best of all those he has ever fought. Alina is stunned for a second by so many compliments. After that, she lowers her head for a second, quietly repeating to herself the words that she is the best. With each passing second, she becomes more and more confident. After that, Alina happily smiles, giggling like a little girl who has received a compliment for the first time. At this time, Igni is surprised at how simple this seemingly cold and strict girl actually turned out to be. After Alina had completely calmed down, she stood up and extended her hand to Igni. She thanked him and told him that he could just call her Alina. She also asked if she could just call him Igni. He says that he doesn't mind and gently squeezes her hand in his. After that, Igni and Alina return to the classroom. As soon as Myra notices them, she immediately runs up to them. She apologizes to Alina with a guilty look, but also says that she, as a teacher, needed to bring her down to earth. Alina tells the teacher that there is nothing to worry about, since she realized that only by realizing one's weaknesses can one become stronger. She also says, and besides, even though she lost, she is still the best. Myra doesn't understand why Alina suddenly became much more cheerful than before she ran away, while praising Igni for his incredible work. However, Myra is still happy that the students are happy. She tells Alina with a smile that in that case her punishment starts from today. For a second she stands in a stupor, not understanding the teacher's words. Then Myra reminds her that they agreed that the loser would obey the winners in everything for a month and that the word must be kept. Alina's face expresses fear. A moment later, Alina runs away from the classroom as fast as she can. Myra demands that Igni run after her again, to which he agrees and hurries to catch up with Alina. At this time, the man is discussing with one of the young students about the royal tournament, where one of the strongest students will be determined. The man says that since the student has a second name, he will probably try to win. The student confidently replies that he will not have to try, since he will undoubtedly win, and the man agrees with First Light Frey Tarqua. One school day, Igni, Yuri, Iris, and Alicia were the last ones left in the class after classes ended and were discussing something. Yuri told his friends that he found a coffee shop with very tasty cakes and invites everyone to go. They agree. However, Alina interrupts their conversation and addresses Igni. She looks at him with a gentle smile and sweetly says that she would like to talk to him about something, if he doesn't mind, of course. The friends leave the teacher and their friend so that they can talk in peace in private, while Igni, hearing the teacher's words, thought about what such a request for a private meeting with him after school could mean. The next moment, his teenage mind begins to paint incredible pictures in his mind. imagining his beautiful teacher in lighter and more revealing clothes. Alina, who had stepped away for a moment, returns to Igni, holding a piece of paper in her hands. Igni's consciousness creates the most incredible fantasies. He picks up the piece of paper, thinking that it could be a love letter, while mentally telling himself that he has calmed down and was not shaking so much. Looking at the paper, he sees that it says something about a magic competition tournament. Seeing the student's strange reaction, Alina asks him what happened to him and if he is okay. He disappointedly answers that everything is fine. Hearing that the conversation turned to the magic tournament, Igni's friends immediately approached him, praising him and saying that it was very cool. Igni does not understand this reaction, so he asks in confusion if this tournament is really that popular. Alina says that it is. She explains that it is a very famous tournament where once a year the strongest man in the entire kingdom is chosen. The greatest people in the kingdom gather to watch this tournament. She also adds with a smile that for many years their Ralmod Academy has sent about 10 people to the tournament, but this time, for some reason, many candidates refuse to go to the tournament. After listening to the teacher, Igni confidently says that since Sensei asks him to do so, he agrees. Alina cannot hide her joy that he agreed, saying that he will help them out a lot this way. Alina also does not miss the opportunity to mention a very important part of the tournament. She says that the winner will receive a prize, namely, the winner will be able to become an aristocrat. Igni asks how this can happen. Alina explains to him that he can become an aristocrat by marrying one of the daughters of an aristocratic family. Surprisingly, these words do not please Igni. Alicia sees her friend's reaction, which seems a little strange to her. She asks him with a little mockery why he is not happy. Could something like this really not be to his liking? Igni does not answer at first. After which he confidently says that he does not like this at all, since, in essence, this is a forced marriage for the girl under pressure from her family. After this, Igni raises his voice and confidently declares that a man should not act like that, but on the contrary, he should achieve popularity through his own efforts. Alina looks at the young student with affection and frivolously compliments him, calling him very cool, until Alicia, in turn, again did not understand what her friend was talking about. Igni is once again happy with his small victory when he managed to impress a woman. In his mind, he is already sure that he will definitely become famous for spinning a guy on his own. Alina wants to mention something else. She says that if a person who is not from an aristocratic family wins the tournament, he will immediately gain much fame and become recognizable. After this, Igni bows deeply to her, confidently stating that he will do his best. After all the matters regarding the tournament have been discussed, Alina says that she needs to introduce Igni to someone and, as she leaves the auditorium, asks Igni to follow her. Then Yuri says that in that case they will leave the academy first. Igni says goodbye to them and asks to have a good meal in the cafe. Listening to their conversation, Alicia says that they act like a couple, and Iris begins to be terribly jealous of Igni. Finally, Alina leads Igni to a separate room. 3 students are already waiting for them there. One of them is standing by the window with his back to the door, the second is sitting tiredly at the table with his head down, and the third student looks the most cheerful of them all. Igni looks around the room where all the future tournament participants are and sees that there are only 2 girls and even 1 guy, but he just puts up with it. Alina suggests that the students get to know each other. The most energetic girl in the room immediately runs up to Igni and says that her name is Frenda. Unlike the others, she has a headband on her head and her cloak, which is part of the school uniform, is pulled down, so the girl is wearing only a top on top. Frenda starts asking a lot of questions enthusiastically. She asks if Igni is a first year and says that she is a second year, which means she is his senpai. She asks about his middle name. Igni says that he doesn't have one. Frenda happily says that then they are alike. She says that the other 2 students in the room are first years, but both have middle names. The girl at the table looks up tiredly and quietly calls her noisy. After this, the last student, who had his back to Igni, approaches him and says that he is pleased to meet him. He introduces himself as First Light Frey Tarqua. Frey was so focused on introducing himself properly to the other student that he didn't immediately notice who was standing in front of him. He was about to say that he was glad to meet you, but he stopped mid-sentence. He sees Igni in front of him, looking at him with a downcast gaze. Frey can't hide his shock as he recognizes his brother, whom he hasn't seen for so many years, and Igni continues to look at him with incomprehension. It turned out that Igni's strange reaction was due to the fact that he simply did not remember his brother. However, the name Tarkes reminds him of something. He thinks for a while, trying to remember where he heard this name and surname. Suddenly he remembers and his face shows the same intense shock that Freya had just a moment ago. Igni realizes that it is his brother standing in front of him, and Freya clearly does not like his reaction. Frey points his index finger at his brother as if accusing him and shouts that all he can do is use fireballs, so he definitely didn't pass the selection fairly. Igni claims that he passed the selection thanks to his abilities. In response to this, Frey says that his words are a blatant lie. However, Elena intervenes in the conversation and confirms Igni's words and honestly passed the entrance exam. She approaches Igni, showing that she is on his side and points at him, saying that the famous student who broke the target for the first time in 25 years is Igni. Frey can't believe what she's hearing. The girl at the table still looks indifferent, and Frenda's face suddenly shows sadness and tears appear in her eyes. Frey still refuses to admit the truth, claiming that his brother is definitely not capable of such a thing, and Igni irritably waves him off, saying that he has already been told that this is the truth. Suddenly, Frenda addresses Igni in a plaintive tone. All of a sudden, she starts to sob loudly, leaving Igni completely stupefied. He tells her that he wasn't lying, asking her not to cry. She points at him and says that she thought he would be her comrade without a middle name, but he didn't tell her that he was the same student who broke the target. Igni sees what a difficult situation he has gotten himself into and understands that things are bad, and everything that is happening in the room begins to remind him of a real battlefield. He tries to think of some way out of the situation, trying to remember what his grandfather used to tell him in such cases. Suddenly, he remembers something from when he was still a child. What if he becomes popular? Then he won't be able to avoid the battlefield when many girls who like him will start fighting for him. Little Igni then said that it would be very cool, and for this reason it is worth becoming cool and popular. However, Grandpa says that the battlefield is not so great and asks him to take a look while he takes off his cloak. After Grandpa took off his outer clothing and exposed his back, many deep scars in the form of scratches could be seen on it, as if left by a wild animal. Igni assumes that Grandpa received them in a battle with an ancient dragon. However, he says that this is not so. He explains that these deep wounds were inflicted on him by a girl in the heat of the battlefield, and his little grandson is very surprised that such terrible wounds were not left by some great magical battle. Grandfather puts his outerwear and cloak back on, saying that love drives people crazy, so he asks Igni to do everything in his power to prevent any situation from reaching the battlefield. Even though Igni was already scared enough after seeing his grandfather's wounds, he hesitantly and stutteringly asked what he would need to do if the situation did reach the battlefield. Grandfather is silent for a while, standing with his back to his grandson, after which he gives Igni only one very short piece of advice: run. After Igni had completely replayed this memory in his head, he realized with horror that there was no solution to this situation. While he was thinking, Frenda suddenly runs out of the room in tears, screaming that she has no comrades in this place. Igni remembers the situation with Elena and realizes that he needs to run after Frenda. However, someone suddenly grabs him by the shoulder, preventing him from running out of the room. It is the girl sitting at the table who finally says her name, Amy, and says that she is a first year. Igni tries to tell her that he wants to take Frenda. However, she refuses completely and says that she wants to talk to Igni. Feeling her hand tighten on his shoulder, Igni realizes that she is quite strong. Frey addresses Igni again. His tone changes. He says he doesn't know what Igni did, but he changed his mind. A smug smile appears on his face again, and he says that the tournament is a place where many spectators gather, and he himself will crush Igni in front of everyone, so he better get ready. After these words, Frey proudly and hastily leaves the room, slamming the door behind him with all his might, after which there is silence in the audience. After everything that happened, Igni stands silently. He is clearly fed up with this whole situation. At this time, Amy is silent for some time, not letting go of his shoulder. Igni asks her if she has any questions for him, as she seemed to want to talk to Igni. After that, Amy finally lets go of his shoulder. She stands in front of him and asks Igni decisively if it is true that she is the student who was able to break the target. Igni answers hesitantly, although he understands that there is no point in hiding it. After these words, which somehow resembled confirmation, Igni stands in front of Igni and, putting her hand on her heart, sincerely says that she wants him to shoot at her with the same fireball with which he broke the target. These words, of course, leave Igni stunned, but also a little frightened, as it looks like it is asking to be included in the list of students who died during their studies. Without waiting for his confirmation, Amy approaches Alina, saying that she wants to reserve the training ground. The teacher encourages her students' desire for self-study and agrees to provide them with the training ground. Igni doesn't have time to stop them, and after some time he and Amy are already standing on an empty training ground, where Igni had previously passed the second stage of the exam. He asks if she is sure, as it could be dangerous. She says that she is strong enough to deserve a middle name, so he should not worry about her. She explains that she is a corrupted Amy and that she can suppress an attack of any strength. She approaches Igni, excitedly saying that she wants to understand how great the power of her skill really is. She again tries to persuade Igni to help her with this. Although Igni is not yet sure, but under persuasion he finally agrees, Amy asks him to attack seriously. After which she backs away a little towards him and Igni uses a fire volley, shooting it at Amy. After such an explosion, she remains completely unharmed and says that it was great. Everything seems normal, but a moment later her face changes, she blushes deeply and arches her whole body, screaming about how pleasant it is. Igni stands in a stupor. This picture clearly made him feel uneasy. As if going crazy with pleasure, he immediately demands that Igni shoot again. There is not a drop of common sense in her eyes, and drool begins to flow from her mouth. Igni looks at the girl with horror, realizing that she is clearly bad. He decides not to delay and again remembers the wise words of his grandfather. He once told him that there are S sadists and M masochists. He said that they are all different and all good. He asks Igni to remember his words that a man is like a vessel, so he must be ready to accept everything. Igni agrees with his grandfather's words. He understands that he is willing to do anything to improve his skills as a man, even though he still doesn't quite understand it. After some thought, Igni agrees to fulfill Amy's request. He fires an unimaginably powerful fireball at her again, thinking that it's time for him and his skills to reach the next level. Amy is undoubtedly happy about this. At this time, Yuri, Iris, and Alicia were walking outside on the academy grounds. Yuri and Iris were discussing Igni and how amazing he was. Yuri said that he would definitely support him, and Iris said that Igni was second to none in terms of encouragement. Afterwards, they turned to Alicia, asking if she will support Igni. She clearly does not share their enthusiasm and replies that she will support him, but only a little, as she is uneasy in crowded places. Suddenly, the three hear a huge explosion. Iris asks in fear what that sound was, and Alicia realizes that the explosion came from the practice stadium and gets on her broom to fly down and check. Amy is already sitting on the floor in pleasure, happily saying that each time he gets better, but he says that this is not all. Igni realizes that this isn't easy and that to please M, he needs to act like S. He maniacally asks if Amy wants more, to which she happily replies that she does. Alicia, looking down on them, looks at them with distaste. Igni found himself on a sandy beach. The sea waves rustle on the yarn, large clouds float on it. Igni looks ahead in surprise. He hears the girls arguing. In front of him are two girls in bathing suits. A dark-haired girl with glasses, her hands behind her head, and next to her stood a shorter girl with long hair tied in a braid. They were discussing which one they liked better about Igni. Igni blushed and opened his eyes wide in surprise. He thought that he didn't believe his ears, that Alina and Myra were fighting among themselves for his attention. Eleonora and Myra grabbed Igni's arms from different sides. He was delighted with what was happening. He thought that now he understood what popularity meant. Someone approached the guys and asked them to stop immediately. Yuri came up to the guys. He raised his hands up, his face was red, and he said discontentedly that in fact he is the one who knows Igni better than anyone. Yuri's eyes filled with tears after Igni reminded him that Yuri was a boy. Yuri walked up to Igni and the girls. Another person appeared next to the boys. A girl with long, dark hair in a bathing suit approached the boys, Alina. Behind the girl, you could see a small house built of straw and wood. Alina said that she was the perfect match for Igni. Yuri and Alina started to talk about who is more suitable as a couple for Igni's day. Alina is only the first of the students, and Yuri is only Igni's classmate. another person started to approach the guys. A girl with dark and short hair approached the boys. She looked scary and said angrily that she was ready to defeat everyone for Igni. The girl's name was Iris. Another girl with a bandage on her head appears in front of the frightened Igni. She raised her hands up and started screaming that Igni is a liar and he needs to take responsibility for his words. The girl's name was Frenda. Frenda was pushed by a blonde girl who appeared. It was Amy. Igni was even more confused by what he saw. Igni raised his hand up, sweat running down his face. The girls were arguing all over the area about who was more suitable for Igni. He tried to calm the girls down, but the girls didn't hear him. Igni saw several girls standing in front of him and realized that this was not popularity at all, but something bad. The atmosphere around the girls was heating up and gradually becoming darker. Igni stood on the sand. A girl in a hat appeared behind him and said that Igni should explain everything to her. It was Alicia. Igni turned around and looked at her in panic. Then he said that Alicia should help him calm the girls down. Alicia was wearing a dress with a bow on her chest and a large dark hat on her head. She looked at Igni with disapproval and said that he was behaving terribly. Hearing Alicia's words, Igni opened his mouth and started screaming. He sank into emptiness. A moment later, Igni found himself on the floor next to his bed. Next to Igni was Yuri. He was reading a book and was frightened when he heard Igni fall out of bed. Yuri sat down on the floor next to Igni and asked if Igni was okay. He was lying with his body on the floor and his feet were on the bed. He sipped positively at Yuri's question and thought that he was very lucky that it was just a dream. Yuri smiled and said that he was surprised that Igni woke up on his own. Igni told her that he apologized for disturbing her. Igni was back on the bed. He turned away and covered himself with the blanket. Then he said that he was going to sleep a little more. Yuri looked at Igni and shouted that he couldn't sleep so much. Igni turned around and said that today was a day off, he could sleep some more. Yuri approached Igni's bed and said that how could he forget that he had promised to organize a training fight before the tournament. Igni opened one eye and looked at Yuri. Igni answered Yuri through his sleep that he remembered his promise. Yuri started shouting that Igni needed to get up, then they would go to breakfast. It was a sunny day. Trees grew next to the building with large windows. Alicia and Iris were waiting for Igni and Yuri. Igni and Yuri entered the arena and greeted the girls. Alicia held a stick in her hands and said that a strong person like Igni also needed to conduct a training battle. Iris smiled widely and began waving her hand to the guys. Igni said that he had never practiced one-on-one combat. Alicia didn't understand what Igni was talking about. Igni was embarrassed. He looked away and replied that now was the time to start training. Then he thought that his opponent was always his grandfather. First of all, he needed to know what level of combat the girls had reached. Igni approached Alicia and Iris. Yuri stood near the boys and said that he would be the first to enter the battle. The girls were a little surprised. Yuri raised his hands up and said with a smile on his face that he needed more practice in fighting. Yuri stood in front of Igni. They were in the arena. Alicia and Iris stood aside and began to talk that they were interested in how the guys would fight since Yuri had the attribute of darkness. Yuri put his hands in front of him and said that he was ready to start the fight. A dark aura began to appear around him. The girls did not take their eyes off the guys. Iris began to sweat on her face. Igni watched Yuri's actions with caution. Yuri ran forward waving his arms in different directions. As soon as he reached Igri, Igri put his hand on his head, thereby stopping Yuri. The girls stood nearby and watched the process with surprise. Yuri sat down on the ground and sadly said that he gave up and Igni won this fight. Igni looked at Yuri and thought that he had done nothing at all. Igni said that Yuri should avoid close combat. Yuri was surprised by Igni's words. Yuri said with tears in his eyes that then, next time he could help with Igni's training if he didn't mind. Alicia leaned her stick against her body and said decisively that she was now ready to begin the fight. Yuri stood next to the boys and offered to be the judge in your fight. Yuri raised his hand and said that the boys could begin a trained fight. After Yuri's words, Alicia flew on her broom into the air above the arena. Igni raised his leg up and stepped back. Yuri and Iris stood nearby and watched the boys fighting. Yuri raised his hand and said in surprise that Alicia and Igni were quite fast. Igni put his hand forward and cast a spell. Fireballs appeared in front of him. He sent them into the air towards Alicia. She raised her hand and blocked Igni's blow. The fireballs flew past Alicia. After Alicia parried the blow, she was very surprised and could not understand where Igni had disappeared to. She began to circle the broom in the air in different directions, trying to find Igni. Igni appears right behind Alicia, who is floating in the air. Hearing Finny rustling behind her, Alicia is very scared. Igni floats into the air and unleashes another fireball attack towards Alicia, causing her to fall off her broom. Alicia manages to grab her broom with her hand, which is floating in the air. She says that Igni's fire attacks are useless against her. While Alicia is holding on to the broom, an explosion occurs on the ground from Igni's attack. Alicia was on the ground, holding her broom above her. Clouds of doom rose into the air from Igni's attack. She thought that the attack had reduced visibility to 0. Behind Alicia, a hand appears from the clouds of smoke, reaching out to Alicia. She senses danger behind her and becomes very scared. It was Igni. He jumped on Alicia. Alicia's broom flies away along with her hat. Another explosion occurs. Between the clouds of doom, you can see the silhouette of the guys. Igni is sitting on Alicia and says that this is how he won the fight. Igni loomed over Alicia. She said that he had good skills in battle even without a trial fight. Igni asked in surprise why Alicia thought that. Igni holds Alicia's head in his hand. Alicia closes her eyes and turns away. Then she says that it can be seen that Igni is agile enough to avoid injury in battle. Alicia turns her head to the other side and says that it turns out that Igni is not so much interested in one-on-one combat as he is in practicing the use of force. Alicia opens her eyes and asks how long Igni is going to stand over her like that. Igni steps aside. He raised his hand up, which held Alicia's head, and asks for forgiveness for what happened. Igni stood in the arena. He closed his eyes and thought that the girls were very soft. You need to touch them as naturally as possible. Iris stood near Igni. She said Igni's name. Iris put her hand on her chest and said with delight that she was ready to practice fighting with him next. Igni looked at Iris nervously and said that she could attack as she wanted. Igni stood in front of Iris. She spread her arms and legs out to the sides and was ready to start the fight. Iris cast a spell, and a moment later Iris was already hugging Igni and was shyly happy. Igni opened his mouth in shock and did not move. There was a heart around the boys. Iris had conjured it. Iris had hearts in her eyes and continued to hug Igni, saying that she had practiced a lot for today, and now she and Igni were together forever. Iris continued to hug Igni. He thought that this technique only pulled opponents closer with the slightest resistance. A conjured whirlwind appears in Alicia's hands. She looks at the boys angrily. Alicia attacks the boys with a whirlwind. Igni and Iris are freed from her approach technique and fly away screaming. Alicia started yelling nervously at the boys that what they were doing had nothing to do with skill training. Igni and Iris were in tears. There were tall trees in front of the building and the windows of Igni's room. Yuri shouted that Igni and he were already late. Igni replied that he was sleeping so well now. Yuri put his hands on Igni, who was lying in bed covered with a blanket, and shouted that Igni needed to get up immediately, as today was the day of the tournament. Igni lay with his eyes closed, his head resting on the pillow, drooling from his mouth. Igni sleepily rose from the bed. Without opening his eyes, he said that everything was fine. If they flew, they would reach their destination in a moment. Yuri had a red face. He looked at Igni in surprise and did not understand what he was talking about. A moment later, Yuri's loud cry was heard throughout the area. The boys flew up. They were high above the city. After a while, the boys found themselves in front of Iris and Alina. Iris clasped her hands together and made a face of fear. She did not expect such a sudden appearance of the boys in front of her. Alina stood behind Iris. Igni held Yuri on his back and said with a smile on his face that he was sorry that he and Yuri showed up at the last minute. He hoped that they weren't late. Yuri held on to Igni. The boys' unexpected landing sent clouds of dust into the air. Alina raised her finger up and said with a smile on her face that the guys were not late. The qualification was still going on. The recommended opponents for the qualifying tournament would be appointed later. Igni looked down a little and tensed when he heard someone call his name behind him. Edward approached Igni, his arms folded on his chest. He smirked and said that Igni was late. Edward already thought that Igni had chickened out and would not come to the tournament. Igni indignantly replied that Edward had come to the training camp to say nasty things. Another guy approached Igni and said that Edward was very upset when he learned about Igni's participation in the tournament, so Igni should not lose. Edward was confused by the words of his accompanying guy. Iris approached Igni and said that Edward had come here before her to support Igni. Igni was surprised by her words. Edward followed his friend, saying that he was unhappy and asking him not to blab. Igni called Edward to him. Edward, hearing his name, was very surprised and looked towards Igni with embarrassment. Igni thanked Edward for his support. Edward stood in front of Igni, his arms folded across his chest. He turned to the side and said that Igni should be more careful. Next to Edward stood his friend with a bump on his head. Igni was surprised. The guys were standing around Igni. He asked where Alicia had gone. Iris, without thinking twice, said that Alicia would most likely not be able to come to the tournament today. Igni, with a downcast look, remembered his first meeting with Alicia, when she told him that she didn't like large crowds of people. Alina moved away from the boys a little and said that Igni should follow her. She would take him to the waiting room and the rest of the boys should take their places in the stands. Igni looked at Alina in surprise. Iris raised her hand up and said with a smile that she would be rooting for Igni. Yuri stood next to her and said that he would be rooting for Igni too. Alina walked forward. Igni followed her. He turned to the guys and waved his hand. The guys looked after him and said goodbye to him in return. Alina and Igni walked side by side down a long and spacious corridor. Alina said that when she first saw what Igni could do, she was very surprised. Igni replied that he was F-rank. Alina walked without stopping and continued to say that Igni was far from entering the academy and even more so from participating in the tournament. Alina thought that he would have to try hard like her, but she was only B rank. Alina introduced herself and Igni. They were using magic. Then Alina said that she can use the same spell as Igni. Their situations are very similar. Igni closed his eyes and said that the first person who won the tournament and did not have a rank was the manipulator Alina, and she also set the record for the shortest fight in the entire history of the tournament. Alina was embarrassed and said that Igni was talking about her. Igni moved his hand to the side and said that he was going to set a new record. Alina put her hand to her face and said that Igni was too kind. Igni was surprised when he heard Alina's words. She said that everything turned out this way because her abilities were not appreciated. Alina was wearing high heels. She stopped and said that no matter how much she won, everyone thought that they could not lose to a B-rank person. They were too self-confident. Inattention could be too dangerous. Alina and Igni stood in front of a tall door. Alina continued to say that beyond that was a waiting room. She wished Igni luck. Alina smiled and said that she had high hopes for Igni, but that the other students must not know about it. Igni put his hands on his waist and replied that he promised to win this tournament. Alina put her hand on her chest and said that even if there is no talent, with perseverance and hard work, people can change a lot. I wonder if the people of the kingdom can realize this. Igni was already standing in front of the door. He turned around and said that everything would be fine. He promised that he would live up to Alina's expectations. Alina held her hand up. She closed her eyes and wished Igni luck. Igni, Amy, Frenda, and Igni's brother were serious about the tournament. On one of the walls of the arena, I saw a large poster. One of the tournament organizers was saying into the microphone that the long-awaited magic tournament had begun, and to begin with he would introduce the participants of the tournament of Block A. On one side of the arena stood a frowning and serious Igni. On the other side of the arena stood a guide Dobana. He was confident in himself. His arms were folded on his chest and he was smiling widely. There were people sitting in the stands surrounding the arena. The organizer continued to say that the rules of the tournament are that the winner is the one who defeats the opponent. Yuri and Igris discussed their experiences. Yuri and Igris noticed Alicia entering the arena stands. She was standing at one of the entrances. Alicia was wearing a cloak and hat and was looking around shyly. Yuri and Igris met Alicia. Igris put her hands on Alicia's back and said that Igni really needs support because Alicia came here for this very reason. Edward stood next to the girls and looked at them suspiciously. The organizer announced the beginning of the fight. Igni stood in the arena and opposite him stood Dobana, who put his sword on his shoulder. Dobana asked with a smile on his face that Igni was studying at Ralmud Academy. Igni closed his eyes and answered that he was a first-year student. Dobana pushed off with one foot, then he raised his sword and began to attack. Dobana said that Igni was most likely one of the gifted, and that was very good. A moment later, Dobana sees Igni in front of him. He raised his hand up and a huge flaming ball appeared above his hand. Dobana instantly freezes in place before he can finish his attack. Dobana began to shake with fear, his mouth wide open. He did not understand what was happening now. A dark atmosphere arose around Igni. He said angrily, "What does talented mean?" Igni raises his other hand above himself. His face could not be seen. Igni said that he understood Dobana's feelings perfectly. Dobana in turn was shaking with fear and said that he did not understand what Igni was talking about. Wasn't he talented? Igni stood there without lowering his hands. He said that he understood Dobana. Probably it was good for him that he was born beautiful. Dobana did not understand what Igni was talking about. He was shaking with fear and tried to cover his body with his hand. Igni began to shout angrily that no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to fix his appearance. Dobana dives into the water that surrounds the arena in fear. Igni still holds his hands above himself and screams furiously. Dobin's jump into the pool caused a large column of water to rise into the air. Igni turns his back on Dobin, who fell into the pool, and the organizer announces that one of the duelists ended up in the water, meaning Igni won. The tournament passed without incident. Igni, Amy, Frenda, and Igni's brother, each of the boys passed the tests smoothly, and everything ended with their victory. The spectators in the stands were noisy and shouting. The organizer announced that a fight was announced between two semi-finalists of Block A. It was Igni, who defeated his opponents with a fireball, and Friend, who wielded cunning magic. The organizer continued to say that the remaining participants in Block A and B belonged to Ralmod Academy. This was to be expected from the gifted generation. Igni looked away and thought that Frey was also on the list of winners. Frenda stood in front of Igni. She raised her hands and said that no one could have thought that they would fight each other. Igni agreed with Frenda's words. She was serious and did not take her eyes off Igni. The organizer announced the start of the battle. Frenda began jumping and waving her arms in place. She cheerfully said that her attribute is water and she is a rank which is the natural enemy of Igni. Water appeared around Frenda. A pillar of water appears next to Igni. It shortens from Friend's attack. While Igni was shortening, he said that he did not agree with Friend's statement. Then he freezes in place. Frenda does her water attack and it hits Igni. Everything around her ends up in water. The girls watch the battle and Yuri says that Frenda's attack hit Igni from behind. Iris sees Frenda's attack and is scared for Igni. Frenda looks forward and is very surprised. She sees Igni in front of her. He said with a smile on his face that Frenda's attack did not reach him. Frenda raised her hand up and nervously said that how could her water evaporate so quickly. Friend's face showed panic and she nervously said that Igni couldn't just take away her magic with a fireball. Igni stretches his hand in front of him and makes a fire attack towards Friend. Frenda was scared. She did not expect such a sudden attack from Igni. Frenda raises her hand up and casts a spell. A large protective wall of water appears in front of Frenda. Frenda put her hands out in front of her, sweat running down her face. She thought she couldn't hold the wall up. She would have to use another spell. Frenda waves one hand. Frenda raised one hand up, lowered one, and a tornado of water appeared above her. The wind fluttered her clothes in the air. Yuri and Alicia watched the fight. She said that Frenda's magic is of enormous proportions. It is very powerful. Not even every adult can use it. Frenda held her hand up and said that she was asking for Igni's forgiveness, but she would make him surrender. Igni was a little scared. He said that he was surprised that Frenda could use such magic. She really is amazing. Frenda began to cast a spell and water surrounded her from all sides. Frenda said that Igni was doomed to lose anyway. Frenda raised her hand up and said that she was ready to easily close any gap. Water columns rushed up. Frenda looks in the direction where Igni was standing and notices that he has disappeared somewhere. Igni's hand appears behind Frenda. Igni fires a volley at Friend, who flies off to the side, screaming that she doesn't understand how Igni ended up behind her. Frenda found herself in the pool that surrounds the arena. The organizer began to say that the fight was declared over and that Igni was the winner. Igni stands in front of the pool and the arena, which rejoices in his victory. The scene moves to the waiting room. Igni is sitting on a bench, his hands folded between his legs. Someone calls Igni. He looks away in surprise. Amy appears in front of Igni. She stands at the door and says that she fought Frey and lost to him. Amy continued to say that she probably needs to practice magic more. Frey's magic gives her an unpleasant feeling. Igni was surprised by what Amy said. Amy looked ahead and said that she came to the waiting room to support Igni. She would be rooting for him to win. In the other room, you could hear what the guys were talking about in the waiting room. Igni stood still and Igni started to walk into the arena. He turned to Igni and said that he was grateful for the support and he would definitely win this fight. The people sitting in the stands were making noise and shouting. The organizer announced that there was one last fight left. It would be between Frey, he owned the highest attribute of light and had a CC rank, and Igni, he owned fireballs and had an F rank. Igni panicked when he heard that the girls' fans were supporting Frey, while only the boys were supporting him. Igni's face darkened and he thought that Frey was much more popular than him. Igni looked at Frey with anger and thought that when he defeats Frey, he will take all his popularity for himself. Frey stood in front of Igni with his head down. Frey went to Igni's side and said that he didn't understand how Igni even seemed to be among the winners. Igni replied that he didn't understand what answer Frey wanted to hear. Igni was here because he had great power. Frey began to look at Igni angrily and said that Igni did not have much power, he could only use fireballs. Igni replied that due to the use of fireballs, he had mastered this skill perfectly. Frey got angry when he heard Igni's confident words. He started saying that a person like Igni would never master magic perfectly. The organizer announced the start of the fight. Frey suddenly casts a spell and attacks Igni. Igni puts his hand in front of him to defend himself. Frey closes his eyes after the attack and clouds of dust rise into the air around the arena. The organizer says that Frey already uses such powerful attacks at the very beginning of the fight, but his blow never reached its target. Frey, hearing the words of the organizer, is very surprised. He begins to light up around him and does not understand how his attack could not hit Igni. At this time, Igni appears behind Frey. A fireball appears in Igni's hand, which increases in size with the help of magic and is directed towards Frey. Seeing the impending danger, Frey becomes frightened. Igni started to smile and said that magic dispersal is a high-level defensive magic. Frey stood in front of Igni, his hands and head were down, then he agreed with Igni's words. A moment later, Frey was overcome with rage. He began to shout that he was a genius and he was very different from Igni. Frey stretched his hands in front of him and began to cast a spell. Frey held his hands in front of him and cast a spell. A magical laser was directed towards Igni. An explosion occurred. Frey rushed to the side where Igni was standing. He began to strike Igni but missed every time. Igni deftly shortened from all of Frey's attacks. Frey began to shout that why he couldn't attack because his magic had the speed of light. The events are transferred to 2 years ago. Igni and his grandfather are in a large stone cave. Igni's grandfather said that he intends to tell Igni something that will help him become stronger in the future. Igni stretched his arms out in front of him. He turned to the side where his grandfather was standing and said that his grandfather intended to tell him about big buffers. Inga's grandfather replied that he did not understand what thoughts were filling Igni's head. Igni looked at his grandfather in surprise when he heard his words that he intended to tell Igni what would be useful to him in the battle with the master of light magic, and it would be about speed. Grandfather Igni was dressed in a suit with a cape. He looked forward and said that the magic of light is not easy to see. You need to learn to see the entire aura, which is the highest stage of spiritual vision. Grandfather looked at Igni and said that in addition to increasing the magic power and leveling up, it is necessary to impart the speed of light magic to Igni's magic. Igni stepped back, surprised by grandfather's words. Igni began to smile nervously and say that as he expected from light magic, it is scary and has incredible speed. He almost died several times during his current training, and now he also needs to practice spiritual vision. Grandfather stretched out his hand and began to shout furiously. Igni calls this persistence. If he becomes the strongest, then he will definitely become the most popular. Igni's face was covered in beads of sweat. He began to mutter something unintelligible under his breath. Then he raised his hands up and with a joyful face shouted that he agreed with his grandfather's words. Grandfather replied that it was good that Igni was so obedient. The events moved to the tournament arena. Igni is shortened by another blow from Frey. Igni thought that he had been reaching the highest limit of light for 2 years. Every day he trained to exhaustion. Igni clenched his teeth and frowned. Frey extended his arm forward and continued to strike Igni. Igni deftly avoided all of his brother's attacks. Igni turned and shouted that he saw that Frey couldn't even reach Grandpa's little finger. Frey raised his hand and started shouting that Igni should stop bothering him. Oro sat in a carved chair. Behind him stood 2 people in dark robes. He saw Igni in the arena and began to nervously say how Igni ended up in the arena and even reached the final because his talent is F-rank fire. Oro perked up and tensed when he heard someone behind him say that Igni didn't have talent, but ability. A man in a long robe appears at the door. He began to say that ability only indicates the direction of the gift, and not talent. Does Oro still not see the difference between talent and ability? Oro asked what Lux was doing here. Lux showed his face and asked why Oro didn't call him father. Lux approached Oro and said that he came to the tournament to see his grandchildren having fun since he raised Igni himself. Oro looked at Lux and frowned. Then an evil grin appeared on Oro's face and he began to shout that Lux was mistaken. No matter how much you train a person with an F rank, he will still lose and the victory will go to the geniuses of Frey, the owner of the CC rank. Frey raised his hand up, a dark atmosphere appeared around him. He said that this would be the end of their fight with Igni. Elena looked ahead and said that it was the first time she saw Frey in such despair. The girls and Yuri watched the boys battle and discussed that Frey wanted to perform an attack called Aurora, which is capable of hitting a large area. Frey held his hand up and then put it forward. He said that he was using the Dawn Light spell. This magic belonged only to him. It was different from Igni's fireball magic. Frey intended to deal with Igni. Frey held his hand in front of him. Igni raised his hand and a fireball appeared above it. Igni said that he did not intend to retreat and he would make a frontal attack. Frey and Igni were serious. They cast their strongest spells at the same time and then a powerful explosion was heard throughout the arena. A powerful explosion resounded throughout the arena. Clouds of smoke and fire filled everything around. The girls and Yuri were frightened by what was happening. Two figures were shown in the arena. It was hard to see them because of the dust flying in the air. One of the guys was standing in the arena, the other was floating in the air. The smoke gradually dissipated and Igni was standing in the arena with his hand outstretched. The entire arena sees Igni standing unharmed in the arena, the clouds of dust gradually dissipating. Oro gritted his teeth and looked at the arena in bewilderment, where Frey fell, defeated. Frey serves into the pool that surrounds the arena. The organizer announces Igni's victory. The stands cheer. Igni stands in the arena, one hand held aloft, the other on his belt. Oro rises from his chair and starts shouting in rage that this can't be happening. Primrose Frey, who has a CC rank, lost. Oro had sweat running down his face and was angry. Lux stood behind him. He closed his eyes and said that Frey's talent was really great, but he didn't know how to use it. Lux recalled their training with Igni. He continued to say that among his peers, Frey was the best in versatility, but he was no match for a single weapon, and he was also inferior to Igni in area attack. Lux stood in front of Oro and continued to say that Oro can't see anything but the primrose. Lux can't trust him with his grandchildren. Oro values his sons as tools. Oro got angry and started shouting that Lux shouldn't teach him. A sinister smile appeared on Oro's face, then he raised his hands up and angrily began to say that Frey had lost, but Igni had not. With Igni, he could achieve the first light. Lux stood behind Oro and started to say that Oro didn't think that his words would ever come true. Lux didn't think that Igni would want to come back. Oro interrupted Lux and ordered him to be quiet. Oro slammed the door in Lux's face. The participants of the battle took their pedestal. Igni took first place. He raised his hand and greeted the fans. The stands rejoiced at his victory. The girl with blonde hair approached Igni. She had something in her hands, and with a smile on her face, she said that she congratulated Igni on his victory and that he should accept his winnings. Igni looked at his winnings in surprise. Igni took the object that the girl had in his hands and asked what he had won in the end. The girl replied that it was the Catalyst ring. The girl continued to say that this ring was specially created for the tournament. They say that the wearer of this ring can cast 3 times more. Igni held the ring from which light emanated. He was glad to hear. Igni held the ring in his hands, then he looked at the girl and thanked her for the gift. Frey stood next to him with his head down. Then Igni turned to the side in surprise. He heard someone calling him. Igni called Frey. He said without raising his head that Igni was strong, which he could not say about himself. Igni replied that winning was not that important. Frey still took second place and should be proud of it. Frey clenched his hand into a Kyulen and said that he was a primrose and ended up in second place. Igni looked at Frey and said that to achieve the first light, the tournament does not play any role. Why is Frey so fixated on the first light? Frey replied that his fixation on the first world came from his father's wishes. Igni turned away, then he closed his eyes and said that Frey should be honest because he himself wanted it. Frey stood next to him without raising his head. Igni met the girls and Yuri outside by the fountain. The boys congratulated Igni on winning the tournament. Alicia stood behind him and smiled. Igni approached Alicia and said with a smile on his face that she had also come to see the organization of the tournament. Alicia began to smile widely and said that she congratulated Igni on winning the tournament. Alina approached Igni and Alicia. Alina put her palms together and said with a smile on her face that she wanted to offer the guys to celebrate Igni's victory. Igni replied that he agreed, and they even paid him money as a win. Edward came up to the boys from behind. He put his hands on his belt and cheerfully said that he intended to pay. He could not afford to celebrate at the expense of the tournament winner. Edward raised his hand and said that he had already prepared a suitable establishment for the winner. Igni stood nearby and looked at Edward in surprise. Igni played Edward's words in his head that he had prepared a suitable establishment for the winner. Igni imagined himself sitting on a large chair with a glass in his hands and surrounded by many beautiful girls. Igni raised his hand and happily wanted to say something, but before he could, he heard someone calling him. Igni turns around and sees his father Oro walking towards him along the stone road. Oro said with a smile on his face that he had finally found Igni. Igni looked at his father in surprise and did not understand what he was doing here. Igni closed his eyes and said that he would be late and the boys should go without him. The boys obediently agreed with Igni and went forward. Oro stood in front of Igni and began shouting that he had been watching his and Frey's confrontation in the arena. Igni thanked his father for this. Oro came up to Igni and grabbed him by the arms. Oro hung over Igni and said that now Igni is the one who is worthy of the first light. Oro held Igni by the shoulders. Igni was very surprised by the broken word he heard. He did not understand what his father was talking about. Oro continued to say that Igni's magic completely destroyed Frey. This surprised Oro. This is probably the highest magic. Igni took his father's hand and said that his father was wrong. He only won because of his ability fireball control. Oro was surprised to hear Igni's words. Oro's face darkened. He said that he understood everything. Igni was hiding the secret of his victory, and that was right. Igni replied that his father was wrong and there was no secret in his victory. Igni looked at his father and thought that there was no swearing in his father's words, and Igni did not understand what his father was talking about at all. Oro said with a smile on his face that he wanted to say that Igni could now return. Igni was very surprised. He smiled and asked where exactly he could return. Oro raised his hands. His face looked scary. He said that Igni can return to the Tarkais family. If he agrees to do so, he will become the pride of their family. Oro sat opposite Igni. A fountain was next to them. Igni kept his hands on his hips and asked if he could become a noble again. His father replied that Igni was right. Didn't he think it was a very good offer? Igni sighed heavily and lowered his head. Then he replied that he did not intend to agree to the conditions set by his father. Oro was surprised. He did not understand why Igni refused. Igni frowned and said that he saw no benefit in agreeing to Oro's proposal. Behind Igni, the fountain and trees rustled. Horror was reflected on Oro's face as soon as he heard Igni's words that he would again face a strict upbringing, a lot of noble formalities. It was unbearable for him. Igni turned his back to his father and started to walk away. Oro was in a panic. He reached for Igni and said that Igni should stop. Before Oro could finish speaking, he was startled by someone putting a hand on his shoulder. Oro turns his head and sees Lux behind him. Lux glared at Oro and said that Igni had already answered that he didn't like what Oro was saying. Igni notices his grandfather and cheerfully calls him over. Oro pushes Lux aside, then he spreads his arms and starts yelling that Lux shouldn't interfere with them since he himself refused Igni. Lux yells back that the rules of popularity are the rules of a person's life. Lux turns to Igni and asks him to name his popularity rule number 15. Igni automatically replies that Rule 15 states that you can't be called a woman. Oro had beads of sweat running down his face. His teeth clenched tightly after hearing Lux's words that Igni was right and knew this rule very well. But did Oro himself know this rule? Oro walked up to Igni and put his hand on his shoulder. Oro hovered over Igni and said that Lux was talking nonsense. Igni could become the pride of their family. This was his only chance to become a noble again. Oro wanted to continue speaking, but Lux interrupts him and asks Igni to name the rule of popularity number 20. Igni immediately replies that the rule is to love your enemy as yourself. Lux stood aside and said that Igni was right. You can't hate people if you love them as yourself. Oro held Igni by the shoulder and started yelling that Lux should shut up immediately since he was talking to Igni. Lux doesn't listen to Oro and continues to ask Igni about the rules. Igni answers all of his grandfather's questions. Lux then says with a smile on his face that Oro will never comply with these rules. Oro glared at Lux. Oro's face changed and he started to smile after hearing Igni's words that he shouldn't be so angry. Igni was already so grateful to him for many things and especially for the fact that Oro banished Igni. Then Oro's face darkened again. Igni began to smile widely and say that he was grateful to his father for freeing him. At this point, Igni wanted to say goodbye to his father. Oro's face took on a frightening look. He began to walk towards Igni and say that he does not understand and Igni is saying something stupid. Lux is standing behind Oro and listening. Then after a moment, there is some noise. Lux grabs Oro by the hands and tells Igni that he shouldn't hesitate. He needs to leave quickly since the guys are already waiting for him. Oro looked at Lux with fear. Igni turned and agreed with his grandfather's words. Oro couldn't free himself from Lux's grip. He started screaming in panic that Injai needed to stop and he was begging him to go back. Oro held his hand out in front of him and watched as Igni ran forward to his friends. The boys were in a place with high ceilings. They were sitting at a round table. Alicia was without a hat. She looked at the boys and started saying that she thought they would go to a prestigious restaurant, but it turned out to be an ordinary place. There were salads and various seafood on the table. Yuri said with a smile that the food looked very tasty. Edward replied that at such moments it was better to eat in crowded places. The food here was really tasty, so the guys could rest easy. Igni was sitting at the table. His hands were on the table and he was lit up around. He thought that he didn't see a single girl in the establishment without clothes. Alicia was sitting next to Igni and looking at him. She asked why Igni was acting so strangely. Edward's escort pointed forward and said that Igni should be grateful since Edward had put his heart and soul into finding a crowded establishment. Edward's mouth dropped open in surprise. Edward slapped his friend and asked him not to say such things again. The escort put his hands on his head and said through tears that he expected Edward to praise him. Aliner said that the boys looked very friendly. The boys took their mugs and put them together. Edward said that today was a holiday, the boys could eat properly. The boys were sitting at the table and one of them asked how Igni managed to become so strong. Igni was drinking from a mug and slammed it down on the table. Igni put his hand to his face and looked menacingly at the boys. Then he replied that he received such strength thanks to his perseverance. Yuri raised his hands. Alicia was sitting next to him. Their faces were glowing with delight. Igni looked at them and smiled. Then he thought that he was pleased to see such faces of the guys. After some time, Iris starts hugging Alicia. Alicia looks at Iris in surprise. Then Iris asks Alicia to show her some trick. Alicia agrees to Iris's request and some object appears in her hands. Alicia stretches out her hand with cards in front of her and says that she can tell everyone's fortune, that she, the genius Alicia, can tell the children about their future. Iris puts her hand to her face and laughs, saying that cataclysm magic is perfect for Alicia. Alicia looks at Iris in surprise, not understanding what she is talking about. Alicia suggests telling Igni's fortune. Igni is a little surprised by this suggestion. Alicia is standing at the table. All the other guys are sitting. Igni puts his finger up and asks Alicia if she can see if they will get together in the same group in 10 years. Alicia agrees to answer Igni's question. Alicia lays out a few cards in front of her, face down, and cheerfully says that in 10 years they will look like this. She then shows one of the cards, which has a skull and crossbones with a sharp scythe. Alicia turns the card towards herself and looks at the picture on it. Yuri began to shake with fear and tears appeared in his eyes. Iris looks at Alicia. A gloomy atmosphere arose around the girls and Yuri. Then the boys started shouting and discussing that the boys shouldn't believe Alicia because she was wrong and she was going to try to tell fortunes again. The boys' shouts could be heard on the street. On the roof of the building opposite the establishment where the guys were celebrating, there was a strange figure of a man. The man was wearing a black cape. The face was impossible to see. The man looked ahead and said that she had finally found Alicia. Alicia stood on an open rocky area. She raised her head up. In her hands, Alicia held her broom. On her head she had a hat. Around Alicia lay soldiers. They did not move. At Alicia's feet lay one of the soldiers. Her broom was dirty with something. Behind Alicia was a man. She wondered who this stranger was. It was Lux. He came up to Alicia and said that he was the one who was bothered by the child's tears. Alicia turned around. Her face was grim. She replied that they were on a battlefield and there couldn't be children here. She was wondering if Lux was her enemy. Lux extended his hand to the side and said that he was not an enemy but not a friend either. He came to keep the promise he made to an old friend and free Alicia. Alicia stood with her back to Lux. She looked at him without turning around. Lux handed Alicia a paper with a coat of arms and some writing on it. He said that if Alicia didn't want to accept his help now, she should take this paper. Alicia turned to Lux and asked what kind of paper it was. Lux held a paper out in front of him and said that it was an examination form for the Ralmud Magic School, one of the kingdom's magic schools. Alicia turned around and said that she was not interested. Alicia stopped when she heard Lux say that if she went to school, she would be able to make friends. Alicia lowered her head and without turning to Lux thought about his words. Lux repeated once again that Alicia would really be able to find friends there, among whom there would be one guy. Alicia wakes up with tears flowing from her eyes, her sleep interrupted. Alicia goes to the window with bars. She looks forward and says that she had a dream. She went to bed as soon as she came back. Alicia's eyes lit up. An idea came to her. It was already night outside. The lights started to come on in the windows of the building. Igni and Yuri were in their room. Yuri was sitting on the bed and smilingly said that today was a fun day. Igni took off his outerwear and agreed with Yuri. Igni recalled the events of the day, how he found himself in Alina's arms, thus she encouraged him to win the tournament. A dissatisfied Iris stood nearby. Igni thought that he could not forget this moment and wished that this embrace would last forever. Yuri, sitting on the bed, said that Igni wasn't tired at all after the fight in the arena. Igni turned to Yuri, then he raised his hand and said that he wasn't tired at all. Igni started to smile and said that Igni was really cool. Yuri sat on the bed and said with a smile that he also wanted to become as courageous as Igni. Igni looked at Yuri in surprise and thought that he was not courageous at all, he just wanted to succeed. It was dark outside the room and it started to rain. There was a table in front of the window. Yuri said that it was storming outside. Igni stood in front of Yuri and looked at the window. Then he said that the weather had deteriorated too quickly because it was so sunny. Yuri raised his hand and said that sometimes a storm would creep up on him unnoticed. It could start when a dragon flew over the city or when someone used cataclysm magic. A moment later, Yuri perked up, realizing the meaning of his words. Yuri runs up with Igni and starts hugging him, screaming. Igni is scared and doesn't understand what's going on. Yuri points to the side, his hand shaking with fear. Igni asks Yuri what happened to him. Yuri pointed to the window. Igni stood with his back to the window, behind which a dark silhouette appeared. Yuri shouted that there was someone outside the window. Igni and Yuri looked towards the window in fear. It was Alicia. She was standing in front of the window. Rain was falling on her from above. Alicia started screaming loudly that the guys should help her hide. The guys led Alicia into the room. She was sitting on a chair. The guys gave her a mug with a hot drink. Igni said that they need to find a change of clothes for Alicia. Yuri said that this is a male dorm. Alicia should behave quietly. Igni said that Alicia wouldn't fit in his clothes. Yuri climbed into the closet and said that he would lend Alicia his clothes. Once in the village, he was given women's clothes. Igni stood behind. He was surprised to hear Yuri's words. Alicia sat on a chair and looked at the guys with a smile. The guys were discussing Yuri's clothes. Yuri was holding a dress in his hands. Igni was standing next to him. Alicia broke the silence and said that she was very grateful to the guys. Igni replied that Alicia shouldn't thank them for that because they were friends. Yuri agreed with Igni's words. Alicia, sitting on a chair, became a little sad. Behind her was a window through which it was raining. Noticing that Alicia had become sad, the boys looked at each other. Then they approached Alicia, who put her mug down on her feet and lowered her head. Igni asked what was bothering Alicia. Alicia raised her hand and said that everything was fine. A moment later, the wall in the boys' room collapses. A blonde girl in armor and holding a large sword enters their room. She stops and says that she has finally found Alicia. Alicia sits on the floor, her body shaking with fear. The stranger says that she never thought that Alicia would dare to use cataclysm magic again. Alicia's face is filled with horror. She realized that her sister is standing in front of her. Alicia was sitting on the floor, her hat was lying next to her. Her sister was standing in front of Alicia. She was holding a sword in her hands. There were pieces of the destroyed wall on the floor in the room. Alicia's sister said that they needed to go home. Igni approached Sister Alicia and shouted that everyone needed to stay in their places and the girl had to explain who she was. The blonde girl in armor and holding a sword said that her name was Celia Esmeralda. She was the first princess of the Esmeralda Empire. Igni and Yuri were very surprised by Celia's words. The boys were standing next to Alicia, who was sitting on the floor. Celia was standing in front of them. Behind her was a hole in the wall through which the street was visible. Yuri asked if this was the same immortal Celia. Igni turned to Yuri. How does he know her? She is really beautiful. Yuri raised his hand and said that it is strange that Igni does not know who she is. Celia is the pillar of life. Celia looked at the boys with a serious look. Igni imagined Celia chained up and not giving in to anyone. Igni thought she was a pillar and a princess knight at that. Alicia stood up. She held her hat in her hands. Celia went to meet her and said that she came here to pick up her little sister. They need to go home. Alicia took the hat in her hands and lowered her head. Then she sadly said that she did not want to go with her sister and did not intend to hurt people anymore. Yuri and Igni were stunned by the information they heard. Alicia raised her hands and cried out piteously that Igni had to save her. Igni walked up to Alicia and launched a fire attack towards Celia. She held her sword out in front of her. Igni thought that he had to save the girl in trouble. Igni held one hand up, the other held Alicia by the back. The attack raised clouds of dust into the air. Igni led Alicia to Yuri and said that they must run away immediately. Yuri did not know where exactly they should run. Alicia was shaking with fear. Alicia held her hat with one hand. Yuri took Alicia's free hand. Igni stood by the ruined wall and shouted to Yuri that they should call the teachers here. Yuri said that they would do so. Igni stood in the room by the ruined wall and looked out onto the street. Celia tried to get to her feet and said that she hadn't been thrown back like that by a spell in a long time. Igni jumped out of the hole in the wall and landed on the ground. Igni stood in front of Celia. Celia said that she knew who Igni was. He was the winner of the tournament. Igni put his hand on his belt and said that Celia was really at the tournament. Igni recalled the moment when he and Alicia were talking during the tournament. He then asked if Celia had found Alicia during the tournament. Celia replied that Igni was right. It was just a coincidence since she was following him. Celia stood in front of Igni and said that if Igni didn't want to get into trouble, he shouldn't bother her. Igni replied that it seemed to him that Alicia didn't want to go home with Celia. Celia held her sword in front of her and said menacingly that it didn't matter to her. She didn't have the right to choose. Celia didn't understand why Igni was trying to stop her. She just wanted to take her sister home. Igni responded sharply that he was doing this because Alicia asked for his help. Celia said that she was part of Alicia's family. How could Igni allow herself to interfere in their family's affairs? Igni remembered his father and grandfather. Then he said that Celia talks about family, but family can be both your support and your enemy. Celia raised her sword in front of her and said with a smile on her face that from what Igni said, it was clear that he had experience in family conversations, but Celia intended to remove Igni from her path. Igni replied that he did not intend to lose to Celia. The sky was gloomy, the rain did not stop. Celia said that hadn't Igni heard that she was the pillar of life, she was warning him again for his own good. Igni was not going to back down. Celia closed her eyes and accepted Igni's answer. Celia rushes at Igni armed with a sword. Igni manages to dodge Celia's attack and hangs in the air. Igni stood on the ground. Celia turned around and started walking towards Igni. She said that she was surprised that Igni managed to dodge her blow. He really deserved the title of winner. Igni listened to Celia and thanked her for what she said. Igni raised his finger up and several flaming balls appeared above him. Then Igni said that now it was his turn to attack. Igni made an attack and a huge explosion occurred. After the attack, Igni became wary. Celia appeared behind Igni. She swung at Igni and said that Igni is really strong. She underestimated him. Celia makes another strike with her sword in front of her. Celia finished the blow and looked up. Igni was floating in the air above her. His legs were burning and the ball between his hands. The rain continued to fall. Celia looked up and said, "Did Igni rise into the air with the help of a fireball?" The fireball burned in Igni's hands. A smile appeared on his face. Then Igni raised his hand, from which a pillar of fire began to rise into the sky. Igni said that the fireball could not only be used for attacks. Celia did not understand what he wanted to do. Igni performs a fire attack. A bright light is heard throughout the area. Igni's attack hits the target accurately. Igni falls to the ground. Celia lies on the ground not far from him. She leans on her sword and tries to get to her feet. Celia said that she now understands that Igni called down lightning with a fireball, and he rose into the air to assess the possible damage. Celia rose to her feet, her face mutilated, but she continued to say that she admired Igni's abilities. Igni looked at Selin with fear. Her face had regained its former appearance, and he thought that she had been able to heal her wounds in the blink of an eye. Now he understood what the Pillar of Life meant. Celia looked at Igni, then she smiled and said that the indivisible Igni decided to help Alicia, just because she asked. In fact, she is not what Igni seems. Igni replied that every girl should have a mystery. Celia said excitedly that Alicia had hurt many people. Igni stood in front of Celia and replied that he was not interested. Celia was surprised by Igni's answer. Igni started shouting that the past can't be changed and they need to move on. No matter what Celia said, Alicia would still be Igni's friend. Celia raised her dream again and said that since Igni won't back down, she intends to defeat him. Igni extended his hand forward and several fireballs appeared in front of him. Celia stood in front of him. She took a fighting stance and was ready for Igni's attack. At some point, Alicia appears behind Igni. She asks Igni to stop. Igni freezes in surprise. Igni holds his hand in front of him and turns to Alicia. She continues to say that she agrees with Celia. She will return home with her. Igni is shocked to hear Alicia's words. Alicia stood motionless. Behind her were two guards who threatened Yuri with weapons. Yuri stood and asked for forgiveness from Igni. Tony lowered his hand and turned away, tightening his voice, which meant Celia hadn't come here alone. Celia lowered her weapon too and stood behind Igni. Alicia approached Celia and said that Celia had acted meanly when she took Yuri hostage. This act was a sign of weakness. Celia replied that she did not think so. The end justifies the means. Yuri, the guards, and Alicia headed toward the opening in the brick wall. Celia followed them and began to hurry them. Igni put his hand on his belt and began to shout that Celia should let Yuri go immediately. Celia closed her eyes and without stopping said that Igni shouldn't worry. She would let Yuri go as soon as they boarded the ship. Yuri should return tomorrow. Alicia walked forward and without turning around said that she apologized to the guys for getting them into trouble. Igni ran to Alicia and asked if she was really happy with everything that was happening. Alicia turned to Igni, then with a smile on her face she said that she was grateful to him for everything, and with that she bid him farewell. The rain continued to fall. Igni stood in the passage between the fence and watched the carriage drive away into the distance. Igni raised his head and said that he wondered what his grandfather or the Pillar of the Element would do in his place. Tony's eyes lit up and he said that their actions would be obvious. Igni raises his hand up and a fireball appears above it. Igni releases a fireball into the sky and says that he intends to punish Celia properly for her actions. The clouds disperse above Igni and a view of the starry sky opens up. He says with a smile on his face that the pillar of popularity, the one who is strong is popular, and he is very strong. Then Igni takes off and heads towards the carriage that is left. The carriage with the boys was racing along the road. Its wheels were falling into holes with water. Splashes of water were flying in all directions. Alicia was sitting, hugging her legs next to Yuri. In the other corner of the carriage was Celia. She said that why Alicia visited the tournament. Celia closed one eye and continued to say that Alicia knew that Celia would also be present at the tournament. Alicia, without raising her head, replied that she did know about her sister's presence at the tournament. Alicia held her knees with her hands, then she turned and said that it was her first friend's match. Yuri sat next to her and looked towards Celia. Celia was surprised that Alicia had a friend. Alicia looked at Celia and said that what was happening was not fair. Celia was much freer than Alicia, and she was always allowed more than she was. Celia turned away and replied that Alicia was wrong. When she first started learning magic, everyone laughed at her. No one believed in her success. Alicia perked up and looked at her sister. Celia lowered her head a little and continued to say that now she knew that the talk of others was a lie. She was able to take Alicia with her since Alicia was too weak. Alicia looked at Celia in surprise. Alicia put her hand on her leg and said with a smile that Igni was indeed selenium, but he lacked confidence. Alicia again hugged her legs and without raising her head asked Celia's words about confidence. Celia replied that Ingal lacked the hoarseness to sacrifice a person. He did not have the strength to betray his friend. Alicia lowered her hands down. She and Yuri looked anxiously towards Celia. A moment later, Alicia came up to Celia and struck her. Celia was very surprised by her sister's action. Alicia recoiled. She put her hand on her chest and screamed that Celia had no right to mock Igni. This act was not courage, it was cowardice. Yuri put his hands on Alicia's shoulder and told her that she needed to calm down. Alicia's face darkened and she thought as soon as she heard Celia's words that it was strange for her to hear such words from Alicia because she had harmed too many people. Alicia dropped her hands down and covered her face with her hat. She thought that she was not a war machine, she just wanted to be a princess. Someone raised their hand up and the cart with the boys stopped. Celia was surprised by such a turn of events. Alicia turned back and said why the cart stopped. Is there someone in the port again? Celia doesn't have time to finish speaking as someone cuts the cart's tent and then there is an explosion. A moment later, Igni landed on his feet holding Yuri and Alicia in his arms. He said that he apologized for being late. Yuri and Alicia formed, seeing Igni. Alicia notices something strange. Igni doesn't let go of Alicia and Yuri, starts jumping to the side and suggests that the guys run. Celia stood next to the torn tent of the wagon and looked up. Igni moved the boys to the forest. They stood on a small understood. Igni stretched out his hand in front and said that he and Mrs. Alina would hold Celia and the others, and Yuri and Alicia needed to leave immediately. Yuri agreed with Igni. Igni stopped and looked at Alicia as she said that she didn't intend to burden the boys with anything anymore. Igni interrupts Alicia and says why she is acting like this. Alicia screamed that the guys will not defeat her sister under any circumstances. Igni grabs Alicia by the shoulders and shouts that what is more important to them now is what she wants. Alicia stands motionless in surprise. Igni loomed over Alicia and said menacingly that she had to make a decision here and now. Either she listened to the call of her heart or obediently followed her sister. Alicia covered her face with her hat and began to say something unintelligible. Then she looked at Igni. Her eyes were full of tears and she said that she needed help from Igni. He had to save her. Igni raised his fist in front of him and cheerfully replied that he would do everything as Alicia wanted. Quick steps were heard near the boys. Celia jumped out of the bushes at the boys. She had a sword in her hands, attacking the boys. She said that her patience had already ended. Igni held Alicia by the shoulders. Alicia was very scared by her sister's attack. A few centimeters from the guys, Celia was hanging in the air, holding a sword in front of her. A large magical sign with symbols appeared around the guys. Celia screamed that it was a teleportation circle or a mirror of movement. Myra was sitting on one of the tree branches. Alina and Yuri were standing next to the tree. Myra raised her finger up and covered one eye, then she said with a smile on her face that Celia was right, her spell would work on the three of them. Myra looked at the guys and cheerfully continued to say that they have a time limit, an hour long. She hopes that during this time the guys will be able to figure everything out in this time, and Igni in turn must protect the princess. Igni manages to say that Myra can trust him. Then the guys disappear into the portal that Myra conjured. Yuri looks at the smiling Alina and asks where exactly they sent the guys. Myra moves the boys to the sand area. Alina tells Yuri that they moved the boys to a place where they can defeat the pillar. Celia finds herself on the ground. She looks at Igni and Alicia, who are hanging in the air. Igni said that they ended up in the Gargant Desert. This is the border of the demon lands. Here they will not be able to interfere with anyone. Celia stood there with her hands down. Igni said that he thought that Celia was the strongest mage. Even if he let go of that fact, he couldn't go back and say that he lost to the Imperial. Alicia hugged Igni. He continued to say that he would defeat Celia, and as a prize for his victory, he would make Celia forget about Alicia. Igni and Alicia were in the air. Igni stretched his hand forward and started attacking Celia, shouting that his plan was perfect. Celia raised her sword into the air and began to defend herself from Igni's attacks. While she shouted that Igni should not be arrogant, she did not intend to lose to him. His attacks would still be useless against her. Celia frowned, a gloomy atmosphere appeared around her, and she said that Igni was already boring her. A fast horse is only good when it has legs. Celia attacks, she rises into the air and strikes Igni's legs. Igni is very scared and clenches his teeth. Igni holds Alicia in his arms and shouts the word fire. Because of Celia's attack, Igni has no legs. Celia is standing on the ground. She lowered her sword down and said that Igni really created legs out of fire. Igni held Alicia in his arms, his legs were on fire, smoke was coming out of his wounds. Alicia was very scared, she was worried about Igni's condition. Celia looked at Igni and said that Igni was really smart. Igni was on the ground and still holding Alicia in his arms, then he said that it didn't hurt, it was just a trifle that he had experienced many times before. Alicia, in Igni's arms, began to scream that he needed to forget about her. Celia could still restore his legs, Igni needed to leave her. Bitter tears rolled down Alicia's eyes. Igni said that Alicia should finally stop suppressing her feelings and desires. Alicia loudly replied that Igni was wrong, she was not suppressing anything in herself. Igni closed his eyes and said with a smile on his face that the capricious girls looked quite cute. Alicia was sitting in Igni's arms, she looked at Igni and stopped crying. Celia interrupted the boys' conversation and said that Alicia was right, Igni should give up and that would be his best decision because he was in extreme pain. Igni's legs were burning and dark smoke was coming from his wounds. Holding Alicia in his arms, Igni began to scream loudly that the real pain was in Alicia's heart. Her pain was hundreds of times greater than his pain. Igni decides to attack Celia again, he casts a spell and then a flaming ball appears. Celia tried to say something, but she noticed something and got scared. Igni held Alicia in his arms, he raised his head up and shouted that he had conjured 16,084 fireballs. Now let Celia try to dodge them all. Celia looked up, her hair flowing in the wind, and said that she saw an incredible amount of mana, something that no ordinary wizard could do. Igni looked down at Celia and thanked her for the praise. A large number of fireballs conjured by Igni fell to the ground. A powerful explosion occurred and large clouds of dust rose into the air. Igni and Alicia hovered in the air above the dust clouds, looking into them. Then, as the dust began to settle, a faint silhouette appeared. It was Celia, she was standing on the ground and leaning on her sword. Clouds of dust were slowly dispersing around her. Celia said that this time it hurt. Igni looked at Celia and thought that he was surprised that she could speak after such attacks and Celia picked up the sword and rested it on her shoulder, then she said that it was now time to reset. A moment later, Celia takes and strikes the sword on the shoulder, blood gushed in all directions. Alicia stood next to Igni, she put her hands on his shoulders. Igni was shocked by Celia's action. Celia drops her sword to the ground, blood comes out of her shoulder, she falls to the ground and says that Igni should not be surprised by her actions. Then there is a bright flash of light. Before the flash, a healed Celia appears. She says with a smile on her face that this is her miracle. Igni looked at Celia with a serious expression. He thought that in order to use spells, mages spent mana in accordance with 1 to 10 or 10 to 1. But Celia's magic can create everything from nothing. Celia appears in front of the boys. She adjusts her hair with her hand. In her other hand, she holds a sword and smiles. Igni and Alicia stand in front of Celia without moving. Alicia put her hand to her chest, then she lowered her head and said that as soon as Celia died, the reset would activate and she would come back to life. She was immortal. Celia stands in front of the boys, a bright flickering is happening behind her. Igni looked ahead and said that the pillar of life, the immortal Celia, is a real miracle. Her magic is truly crazy. Alicia looked at Igni worriedly. Igni is lost in memories of training with his grandfather. Igni had a fireball in his hands. His grandfather was behind him and said that the one who is strong is popular, but the one who looks 120% is much more popular. Igni made a face and tried to continue casting spells. Grandfather was behind him and said that he knew many girls stronger than Igni, but still Igni should not give up. He will definitely succeed if he tries. Igni became more confident. He smiled and thought that he finally understood what his grandfather meant then. Igni looked at Celia and said that he had honed his skills time and time again, being on the brink of death. Celia replied that his words sounded strange since he could not use anything except fireballs. Celia became wary when she heard Igni's words that Celia was right, so he would show her everything he was capable of. Igni stood on tortuous legs, he put one hand on his belt and confidently said that he would show Celia the power of his magic. Celia's face darkened and she said with displeasure that what kind of power was he going to show. Igni stood next to Alicia and said that while using this spell, he would not be able to use fireballs, so his legs would disappear. Celia understood Igni. Alicia grabs Igni by the stomach. Igni casts a spell and his legs disappear. An air vortex appears around the boys. Igni raised his hand up and thought that he can't use this spell because of the proximity to the demon lands. Igni spread his outstretched hand wide and said a spell. A frightening aura appeared around Igni's hand. Celia looked at Igni in fear and thought that she did not understand Igni's magic. It distorted light. Celia looked at Igni, who was being held by Alicia, and he raised both his hands up. Celia thought that she was wrong. Igni's magic actually distorts the existing reality. Igni asked if Celia knew the legend about the creation of their world. Igni put one flickering fireball. He continued to say that everything started with a small fireball. His magic does not allow him to use anything except a fireball, so his magic is the magic of the beginning. Igni cast the spell of creation of the world. Celia wanted to take the sword out of the sheath. She thought that for some reason her body stopped moving. Beads of sweat appeared on Celia's face and she asked Igni that he really managed to stop time. Celia held her sword with both hands and said that this was not their world. Igni's tricks would not work here. Igni replied that this was his world and time was under his control. Celia smiled and said that Igni couldn't defeat her anyway, so his attempts were useless. Darkness fell and Celia froze in place. Igni began to say that Celia was wrong. He intended to break her will. It would be worth starting from 10 years. There was emptiness around the boys. Celia thought that nothing was moving around them and there was nothing, no wind, no sound. The only thing that existed was her consciousness. 10 years, that's what Igni meant. Celia looked worried. She dropped her sword to the ground and bent down a little. Alicia held Igni in her arms. He asked Celia how she had spent the last 10 years. Celia was terrified. She looked at her hands and said, "Can she really move again?" There was a gloomy atmosphere around Celia. Celia clenched her fist and rushed towards Igni furiously. As she made her attack, she thought that since she could move, she could deal with Igni now. Celia froze in front of Igni in the air. Igni stood motionless and said that now Celia will be locked up for 100 years. Celia looked ahead and could barely make out Igni's face. She thought in horror that another 100 years awaited her. Celia collapsed to the ground next to Igni and Alicia. Alicia held Igni in her arms. Igni began to say that now the choice is Celia's, that she will choose to give up or continue to stand. He can stop time for 1,000 and 1,000,000 years. Celia sat on the ground with her head down. After a while she broke the silence and said that she intended to surrender. After some time, the guys find themselves in the medical center. Igni is sitting on the bed and Celia is sitting at his feet. Celia said that she completely healed his legs. Igni looked menacingly at Celia and said that now she would forget about Alicia, and he in turn would not tell anyone about her defeat, whether Celia agreed to such conditions. Celia agreed. Alicia stood not far from the boys. Celia stood up and Alicia came up to her. Celia said that Alicia had found herself a really nice guy. Alicia shouted that Igni was not her boyfriend. Celia put her hand to her chin and thought about it. Then she looked at the boys and said that since Igni wasn't Alicia's boyfriend, then he would be her boyfriend. Igni and Alicia's mouths dropped open in surprise. Alicia was very indignant at Celia's words. Celia winked at Alicia and said that she was serious. She had 100 years to think about it. Alicia ran up to Celia. Her face was red and she started screaming that Celia shouldn't do that because she was the first princess of the Esmeralda Empire. She had to get married officially. Celia replied that she didn't see any problem with that. Alicia put her hands on her sister's back and started to escort her out of the room. Then she said that she was grateful to her sister for healing Igni, but now it was time for her to go home. Igni looked at the girls in surprise and thought that this was his moment of glory. Alicia turned towards Igni, her face red with embarrassment. She then ran up to Igni and kissed him on the cheek. Then she took off and started running. She said that she was grateful to Igni for helping her and that it was time for her to run. Igni blushed. He put his hand to his cheek and shouted to the whole medical center that he didn't understand what had just happened. Someone enters the room where the girl is sitting on an expensive chair and addresses her, calling her a saint. The girl in the cloak, who has just entered the room, reports that she has found the man the lady was looking for. After asking where he is, she briefly explains that he is in the Kingdom of Anthem at the Ralmond Magic Academy. The lady receives photographs of the protagonist from hand to hand and begins to rejoice that she has finally found him, because they have not seen each other for 3 whole years. She sticks his photos on the wall, on one of which Igni stands with his classmates. The lady adds that she knew about their connection, created by fate itself. Finally, standing by the wall, she says his name. She folds her hands in front of her, hoping for a quick meeting, while the hero has a great time in the company of his classmates and other girls. The next day dawns. Iris meets Igni on the street and joyfully runs up to him, grabbing his hand. She wishes him good morning and asks if he got enough sleep. He, walking along, replies that he seemed to have slept well, and then the girl says that his fights during the tournament were simply incredible, adding that she never doubted him. The hero smiles awkwardly and remembers that after the tournament he fought with the pillar, imagining how he threw a fireball while fighting Celia. In the end, he decides not to brag about it to everyone, as he suspects that they will think something bad about him. Suddenly, he's distracted by a frowning Iris. She suddenly blocks their path and decides to tell her classmates the news that nearly made her faint. Igni asks what this news is. He thinks that if the girl is talking about that explosion, then there's nothing surprising about it. At that moment, he remembers the guys who had to move into a temporary dorm. Iris's expression immediately changes, and gesturing vigorously, she explains that Alicia has moved into the dorm, showing her shock with her whole appearance. Then the hero breathes a sigh of relief as he understands what is being discussed and replies that he has not heard anything about it. Suddenly, someone flying above them also becomes interested in this news and asks a question about what is happening. A girl floating in the air on a broomstick smiles and asks if she can't live in the dorm anymore, and the guys look up and recognize her as Alicia. They begin to rejoice at her arrival. When Alicia descends to the ground, Igni says that things will be even better now that the 4 of them will be able to attend the academy together, and she immediately agrees. Then the girl in the hat smiles sweetly, revealing her teeth, and admits the hero is right. Afterwards, she steps aside and begins talking to Iris, while Igni muses about a dubious theory he had yesterday. Looking intently at Alicia, he mentally tells himself that the theory is that the girl is actually in love with him. At this time, she chats sweetly with her classmates, periodically glancing at Igni. He recalls the moment he saved her and supports his theory by saying that Alicia happily kissed him on the cheek, closing her eyes and not noticing his surprise. But then the hero suggests that for someone this might be a completely normal thing, so he decides that it would be better to ask the girl herself. Then, putting on a confident expression and holding out his hand, he calls the girl's name and she turns her attention to him with a surprised expression. However, something suddenly stops Igni. The hero suddenly wonders if he couldn't have been imagining things. The thought occurs to him that the girl simply felt sorry for him, like a helpless bug, and Igni hesitates for a moment. He starts to stall for time, trying to think of something to say, while Alicia looks at him with a blank look. Igni reflects on how sometimes people misunderstand others and confess their love to them, only to have their hearts broken. But then he remembers that there are other cases where people believe the object of their affection has no feelings, so they hide their feelings for the rest of their lives. Mistake after mistake happens, and it happens every time. To the hero, it seems like an endless hell and is presented as an optical illusion of an endless staircase, running along which he moves from the side called loves to the side called does not love. Sweat begins to drip down his forehead. The hero asks himself, what should he do? Suddenly, he remembers the moment when his grandfather approached him for an important conversation. He asked if Igni thought that being popular was. It means being able to make girls giggle playfully in conversation, and he suddenly looked up from his work, asking if that wasn't true. The girl frowned and said no, not at all, as this was only the beginning. He asked Igni to cast aside his naivety, as such thoughts would, on the contrary, make the girls hate him. Hearing this, he immediately became frightened and cried out, in what sense could they hate him? The grandfather clenched his fist, and insistently declared that the hero must continue to live in such a way that the girl would fall in love with him even more deeply. He began to insist that this is what it means to be popular. Then the grandfather said that popularity has no limits, and explained to Igni that just making a girl laugh once doesn't make him her boyfriend. According to his grandfather, he would be a simpleton, which would be a shame for him, and he became even more horrified. Igni realizes things aren't so simple and makes a distressed face while Alicia watches. He thinks it was just one time, and even then it was a kiss on the cheek. The protagonist's expression suddenly changes and he becomes pleased. He realizes that Alicia hardly fell in love with him after such a trivial matter and thanks his grandfather for that conversation. A confused Iris begins to worry and asks Igni if he is okay, but Alicia answers for him, explaining that he is fine as this is his usual behavior. Suddenly, Yuri comes up to her and asks if everything is okay with her, and the girl in the hat smiles sweetly, asking her not to worry about her. But then Alicia says that in the morning she received a letter from her sister, in which the girl apologized to her and said that she wanted to meet Igni again. The girl in the hat thinks that her sister has settled in well, and then Yuri asks if she wants to tell Igni about it. Alicia frowned and replied in a serious tone that she would never do that. A little later, the boys return to the classroom where the other students were. Two girls approach Igni and, smiling, begin to admire him. One of them reports that they saw the heroes fight yesterday, and the other admits she was very surprised as she didn't know he was so strong. Seeing their impression, Igni justifies it by claiming he was simply lucky, privately reveling in his popularity. Meanwhile, Iris, sitting at the desk in front, overhears their conversation with a disgruntled expression. Suddenly, Alina enters the classroom and wishes the students good morning. She then looks around the class and asks if Igni is there. Hearing his name, Igni immediately turns to face the teacher, and the girls do the same. Noticing the hero, Alina approaches him and asks him to come with her. Igni is a little surprised and wary, unsure of what to expect. Eventually, he follows her and arrives at the conference room. There, he inquires about this place. The teacher smiles and, holding out a finger, explains that students come here to ask the teachers for advice. Without showing it, Igni is a little surprised when Alina suddenly places her hand on his shoulder and admits that she'll need his advice today. Then she hands him a piece of paper and asks him to look at it. The hero sees the document's title and asks if it's really an assignment. They sit down at the table and the teacher explains that third-year students usually do this kind of work. However, Igni's performance showed her that he, too, could take on such tasks. Then the hero becomes more confident and begins to beam with joy. He asks what his assignment will be. Alina replies that it involves transporting weapons. She explains that Igni will need to transport a shipment to the Duchy of Lurtalia, showing its location and destination on a map. Alina then says she won't force Igni to take the job if he doesn't want to, but immediately adds that the clients are elves. This is quite unusual, as elves dislike humans. But then the hero remembers his teacher Myra because she is also an elf but incredibly friendly to people. He remembers Myra teasing him by sitting on his shoulders, and Alina says that this girl is rather an exception to the rule. She then adds that, be that as it may, she was very surprised when she received the task from the elves. Igni asks if this has never happened before, and the teacher confirms his suspicions. She says this is the first quest from the elves ever received by the Ralmond Academy. The hero then begins to suspect something, as the elves dislike humans, but they sent a letter to the academy after his victory in the tournament. Igni assumes there are a bunch of his admirers among the elves and begins to glow. Then he places his hand on his chest and proudly declares that he would gladly take on this task. Hearing this, Alina smiles sweetly and says she knew the hero wouldn't let her down, and she is immensely grateful to him. She then explains that the task will be completed within 2 weeks, starting next week. The hero will be excused from classes for this period, allowing him to fully concentrate on the task. Alina suggests that Igni will need an assistant and promises to do so, which surprises him and prompts him to inquire about the assistant. He wonders if he can choose his own companion, especially if the teacher is so confident in him. She feels a little awkward, but the smile doesn't fade. Alina replies that this is a very important task and therefore they can't afford to lose face. If the hero chooses someone incompetent, the task may drag on for a long time, which will have a very negative impact on the situation. So, to avoid such situations, the teachers choose the assistants first. She's thinking of something like a support squad, and Igni imagines several girls protecting him. He agrees. Then asks if there are people the hero doesn't get along with, but he replies that there are and assures her that he's friends with everyone. Then the teacher is pleasantly surprised by this. She hugs him so tightly that Igni's face is right next to her chest and begins praising him. Alina says the hero is a good boy and asks him to try harder. For the first few seconds, Igni doesn't quite understand what's happening, but then he realizes everything and, blushing deeply, begins to struggle. He promises her mentally that he will give it his all. The day of the mission arrives. Near a brick wall, Iris spots the hero and begins waving at him. Then she calls out to him and he approaches her. The hero asks what the girl is doing there, and she, proudly placing her hand on her chest, replies that she was asked to help him with a task. Igni thinks Iris is an S-rank Earth mage, making her very skilled at manipulating the battlefield. He, on the other hand, specializes in firepower, making them a great team. The hero smiles in pleasant surprise, after which he notices that the teacher seems to have prepared a cart for them. Iris smiles broadly and says she's thrilled that her first mission will be with Igni, calling him Master. Then they fall silent and an awkward pause ensues. The hero recalls a conversation with his grandfather. He called Igni stupid and pointed out that he spoke like a weakling. They began a heated argument, and the grandfather called the hero a man who was talking nonsense, not understanding the beauty of a flat chest. But Igni sharply retorted that everyone knew that big breasts were the best, and asked what could be so cool about a flat chest. Grandpa and the protagonist continue to argue heatedly. Grandpa says breast size means nothing and calls Igni a fool for seeing nothing but breasts in them. Then the grandfather asks whether the hero has thought about the girl's clothes and her character, after which he asks whether he is not interested in her inner world. Igni suddenly freezes, and then his grandfather tells him he shouldn't think that focusing on just breasts will make him popular. The hero realizes his grandfather is right, and his grandfather asks him to open his eyes. Then Igni becomes sad and confused, eventually admitting that he was wrong. He understands that everything about a girl is important and believes that anyone who only loves breasts is unworthy of being called a man. This is precisely what Igni realized at that moment, but at the same time he thinks it would be nice if Iris had breasts. Seeing him looking at her, the bewildered girl turns to him and begins to stare back at him with wide eyes. The hero suddenly breaks away from his thoughts and suggests they set off. Iris, Igni, and Edward raise their hands and shout that it's time to go. Suddenly, the hero and the girl freeze, trying to understand what is happening, while the guy smiles widely and suspects nothing. A second later, Igni grabs Iris and they both startle Edward. Edward is taken aback by this reaction and says that he's actually been with them the whole time. Edward then explains that he will closely monitor the health of Iris and Igni, and the hero has questions. Then the boy puts his hand to his chest and explains that he's a healer. Hearing this, Igni is very surprised. Edward says that even though his abilities are rated A rank, he can still heal his broken arm. He then adds that this doesn't mean the boys can just put themselves in harm's way, and the girl calls it all stupid. Iris is confident that Igni will never fall for the enemy's attack, calling him her master. Edward agrees with her since the hero is his friend and winks at the girl. Igni realizes things are getting serious, seeing that the boys, despite trying to keep a low profile, are already ready to kill each other. The hero gets a little scared and asks them to stop arguing, suggesting they head out on their mission. The boys approach a horse-drawn carriage and Alina sees them arrive. She explains that they will ride in this carriage to the meeting place. The teacher then adds that the students will be briefed on the details of the mission by those who commissioned it, and they will also issue the reward. She asks them to board the vehicle, warning them that the academy will not monitor the mission, and Igni then mentally concludes that they are left to their own devices. All the students board the carriage, and when the hero is the last one to enter, Alina suddenly remembers something. She asks them to remember that in case of emergency, they can abandon the task. Then Igni turns around with a surprised face and asks if this is really possible. The teacher smiles sweetly and says that although this may affect the situation, the safety of the students is paramount for the academy. Therefore, Alina asks them not to take unnecessary risks and tries to negotiate this with Igni. Before he finally gets into the carriage, he turns to her one last time and asks her not to worry. Sitting down on the seat, the hero clenches his hand into a fist and looking into Alina's eyes reminds her that he is very strong, while Edward sits and looks out the window. The teacher looks a little embarrassed for a moment but then smiles again and calls Igni a good boy. The carriage begins to pull away and she wishes the children a safe journey. Iris grabs the hero and says they're like on a date while he laughs awkwardly. Meanwhile, Edward turns to them with an indignant expression and asks them not to forget about themselves. Suddenly, Iris remembers something and asks the guys if they know how long it takes to get to their destination, and the hero replies that he only heard that they were going to some forest. But then he concludes that since a carriage was called for them, the journey ahead will be long. Hearing the rapid clatter of hooves and the sounds of the surrounding nature, Igni closes his eyes and invites the girl and boy to relax and enjoy the journey. When the carriage arrives at its destination, the boys disembark and discuss the journey. The hero says they wasted the whole day on the road alone, and the others agree. Suddenly, someone comes up to them from behind and announces that the guys have finally arrived. They turn around and a short-haired elf girl appears in front of them, who introduces herself as Lura, the head of the convoy. Igni thinks that this is his first meeting with an elf, not counting Professor Myra, and he evaluates Lura as a beauty. He then shakes her hand, smiling politely and saying that he is very pleased to meet her, and the elf is surprised that it is really him. Suddenly, she begins to talk about how she saw Igni perform at the tournament and admits she can't believe he could win using only fireballs. Lura says she's never seen someone so skilled in magic, and the hero, taken aback, asks if that's true. Then he expresses great gratitude, almost jumping for joy inside himself. The elf says that their journey may not be long but still asks for love and favor, while Igni wonders, was it at her request that he was appointed to carry out the task? Suddenly Lura turns around and asks to be allowed to introduce her companions, and the hero casts his surprised glance in the same direction. First, she points to the girl whose face was covered by a black hood and introduces her as Aina, and then she points to the disgruntled elf, calling her Lily. Igni is a little surprised and asks if her companions are standing too far away. Then he approaches them and says he's pleased to meet them. He thinks about how he needs to make a good impression so the girls don't hate him. Suddenly, Lily frowned deeply and, turning away, snapped angrily. Seeing this, Igni immediately became alarmed, fearing that the girl might already hate him. The protagonist explains that they then proceeded to their next task and headed to the Duchy of Lurtalia, following a carriage pulled by 2 horses. Along the way, the boys were attacked by a number of monsters, including goblins and mountain bandits. However, according to Igni, they didn't stand a chance against them. He then remembers talking to Iris at the carriage, standing near Lily. He explains that despite everything, they couldn't get along. Seeing Lily meet the hero's gaze, Iris concludes that it seems the elves truly don't like humans. Later, Lura approaches Lily and asks how much longer she'll be stubborn. She says nothing can be changed, but the disgruntled elf tries to argue with her. Lura suddenly interrupts her and apologizes to the boys. She says that Aina has a rather reserved personality, so she doesn't really like to talk, and as for Lily, she understands that they can see everything for themselves. The disgruntled elf turns away and replies that she can't trust the hero since he uses nothing but fireballs. But he's a little surprised and says he doesn't do this because he can't use anything else. Then Igni smiles deliberately and adds that he is actually a mage of 1 spell. Lily is unimpressed and asks what good he is since he is only a 1-spell mage, which leaves the hero stunned. Suddenly, while he doesn't know what to say, Lura becomes interested in this spell. Then, a second later, she rushes toward him and starts shaking him by the shoulders, saying it's incredible. Lura concludes that people like him really do exist. At first, the hero doesn't understand what the girl is talking about, but then it dawns on him and he agrees with her. He reflects on the fact that he doesn't know of any such mages other than his grandfather, and out of curiosity, he asks if they're really that famous among the elves. But contrary to his expectations, Lura replies that such mages aren't particularly well known. She explains that these are, of course, all rumors, but people say that the first pillar of magic was a mage of 1 spell, and Iris, hearing this, looks away and ponders something. She wonders what the first pillar means and assumes it refers to a hero. However, Iris says this is strange, imagining a mage who fights using magic and a sword. She recalls that legends say he could cast spells of all elements. Lura replies with displeasure that she knows this because it's in all the stories. That's why she pointed out that they were just rumors. The hero, with his back to her at the time, pays particular attention to the rumors. Suddenly, Iris smiles and says that, nevertheless, there are many rumors circulating about Mr. Igni, which surprises him. Lura doesn't quite believe it and asks what kind of rumors they are. Iris explains that the rumors are varied. She cites the myth that Igni is the son of an aristocrat and that she is his servant. Then the girl tells another rumor about the hero having his own harem, as people say he's dating both her and Alicia. This makes him wary. Iris adds that there's also a rumor about his relationship with Myra and Alina, or Ermi and Alina, and then goes on to say that he's being portrayed as romantically involved with everyone. Igni doesn't believe what he's hearing and verbalizes this, while Lily calls it disgusting. Then the hero decides to ask Iris something else, but she immediately understands what he's thinking and says that it of course also concerns Yuri. Igni introduces her and thinks he expected this all along. Then Iris remembers Edward and says that he starts screaming every time he hears such rumors. She glances at the boy and winks, while the hero turns in the same direction with a surprised expression. Edward sees this and frowns, sweat starting to trickle down his forehead. He begins to justify himself by saying that he simply can't stand it when people spout nonsense. Edward asks Igni not to think he did this for him and turns away. Hearing this, Iris rolls her eyes and says it would have been better if the boy had answered honestly. Suddenly, when she opens her eyes, she sees something ahead and screams. The girl reports seeing a city ahead and concludes that they've already passed the halfway point. Lura stops and turns to the boys. She suggests they set up camp there, and Iris is suddenly surprised. The elf assumes that she wants to ask why they can't spend the night at the inn, and the girl confirms her guess. Then Lyra holds out her hand with her index finger and explains that although spending the night in a hotel is safer and more comfortable, this does not mean that the boys will be completely safe. Edward guesses her thoughts and suggests that the reason is the weapons transportation. The elf smiles and says that's precisely why they should set up camp. She then explains that their cart could be robbed if they leave it unattended and convinces them that it would be much safer to spend the night outside, keeping an eye on the cargo. The hero imagines the angry and delighted thief carrying the sack from the cart, while Iris says it makes sense. So Lyra suggests the children pair up, but before she can explain why, Lily suddenly interrupts, raising her hand. She frowns and says she wants to be on guard duty with them, placing her hand on her chest. Then Lily stands next to the hero, who is smiling with tension, and turns her head away from him. Lyra takes note and declares that she has made her decision. After this, they light a fire. Lily and Igni sit together not far from the fire and turn away from each other. The upset elf doesn't understand why she was put with him, while he thinks about how tense the atmosphere is now. However, he is still grateful to Lyra for this. The hero recalls how she waved to them and said that they would definitely become friends. Suddenly, Igni recalls a conversation with his grandfather. At one point, he created a fire between his hands, turned to his grandfather, and said he wanted to become popular as soon as possible. Then, while his grandfather stood there watching his merriment, he asked his grandfather how he could attract the attention of girls. Despite the protagonist's good mood, the grandfather snaps back, saying there's no way he can attract girls. Igni's expression immediately changes and he asks him to repeat himself. The grandfather explains that if the protagonist were as popular as he is, something could be done, but right now nothing will help him. Then, while he is in shock, he adds that it is because no one knows him yet. Grandfather asks Igni to think for himself and asks if anyone could fall in love with a random passerby. In his mind, it looks like a picture of a lonely guy standing against a wall, with a multitude of unfamiliar women passing by. But the hero replies that people can still fall in love with passersby, but the grandfather says that these are just fairy tales, asking him to open his eyes. Then, in order not to argue with his grandfather, Igni concludes that he just needs to attract attention to himself and asks about it. But he suddenly extends his hand and furiously replies that popularity is achieved by attracting attention through charisma alone, convincing the hero that this is the foundation of all things. As Igni sits down next to Lily, he remembers that he needs to impress her with his charisma. He decides to do it right now and with complete confidence turns to Lily. But suddenly something attacks them and the hero is forced to push her away, asking her to be careful. The elf is terrified and hides behind Igni, asking him angrily what he's doing. At that moment, a large, angry owl with horns soars above them, forcing Lily to stop her indignation and attracting attention. The girl recognizes the animal and reports it as a kidnapping owl. She begins to back away, explaining that such owls attack children and drag them back to their nests. Hearing this, Igni immediately becomes wary. Suddenly, Lily sees the owl begin to look at her and realize something. She starts to run away and hides behind the hero, not understanding why the owl is attacking her. Igni suggests that the animal must have mistaken her for a child, but Lily tells him that she is no longer a child. The hero then extends his hand with his index finger and uses the homing flame spell, while the owl is already preparing to attack them again. The blow sends the animal flying and the girl is amazed at its strength. She then stands up and expresses her deep gratitude. Suddenly, Lily notices that a button has come off Igni's shirt, and he assumes that it happened while he was dodging. The girl starts to peer at his collar, and the hero realizes that this is starting to look strange. He calls out to her. Lily announces that she'll sew the button back on. She asks Igni to remain still and notices that he's wearing some kind of necklace. A second later, he realizes what she's talking about and pulls a chain from under his shirt. Igni explains that it's simply a ring that speeds up spell casting. He received it for winning the tournament. Lily pauses for a moment to get a better look at the ring, but then suddenly shudders, thinking of something. The girl asks the hero not to think that she is sitting next to him so that he can protect her and explains that she just wants to take a closer look at this ring. Then she pulls away from Igni, her face turning red. He smiles in response, thinking that he now understands everything. He realizes she's a tsundere, someone who behaves aggressively toward the object of their affection. He recalls a conversation with his grandfather when he told him he couldn't stand tsunderes. he decided to ask why he had such an attitude towards him. The hero replies that they can never be understood. In his opinion, these girls seem to love a man, but at the same time they behave rudely towards him. Hearing this, grandfather said Igni was demanding too much. He wanted both undeserved popularity and the girl's recognition, all at once. He then asked the hero not to underestimate his popularity. Grandfather suggested he introduce himself. The hero imagines how the girl initially treats him with a certain disdain and constantly quarrels with him. But then, at some point, she opens up and the hero is able to experience her kindness. At that moment, Igni remembers that this is the beauty of being a tsundere. The next day dawns. Lily is standing on a forest path and suddenly feels a presence. She turns around and, seeing it's the hero, immediately frowns. The girl asks what he wants and insistently asks him not to look at her. At this moment, Lura comes up to them and asks them to stop arguing, but the hero replies that he is already used to it. Igni puts on a satisfied face and folds his arms. He's a little sorry that Lily has returned to her usual self, but that's part of the tsundere charm. Then he wonders if Alicia's kiss was also a manifestation of that tender, affectionate tsundere side. Now he understands that tsundere girls are the best. Seeing Igni glowing with happiness, Iris turns to him and remarks that he's in a very good mood. The hero then turns to the girl and asks her what she thinks of guys who are initially cold to girls but eventually become kind. This question makes Iris pause as they continue walking behind the carriage. After some time, the girl smiles awkwardly and admits that such guys scare her. Igni is surprised by this, but then he smiles a little and realizes that Iris thinks the same way his past self did. In his mind, he addresses the girl and tells her that she still has her whole life ahead of her. Suddenly, Iris thinks and says that Edward is the guy who is cold at first, but then begins to treat you kindly. The protagonist is shocked when the guy hears his name and asks if the girl called him. Iris notices that Igni has gone very pale and is surprised. She starts calling him, but he doesn't even respond to his own name. Suddenly, Lura distracts them and asks everyone to look ahead. She points to the fortress and says that they are the walls of the city of Richilia. She then explains that if they cross them, their task will be completed. But suddenly Lura notices someone's eyes in the darkness and reports that there is someone in the forest. The hero sees this too and turns to Iris, asking her to create a barrier. She then agrees, clenches her fist, and prepares to cast the spell. Iris raises her hand up and uses the spell Stone Wall, causing a thick stone wall to rise up around her. Hearing loud stomping, Lura at first assumes it is bandits, but Igni clearly understands what is going on and denies it. They see a multitude of huge stone people advancing on them, and the hero reports that these are golems. The golems approach the wall and begin to break down the stone. Iris sees that there are a lot of them, but despite this, she decides to deal with them. She raises her hand again and uses the spell Burial, after which the golems begin to be crushed by the stone walls. Seeing that not all have been defeated, the girl turns around and apologizes for the fact that some have eluded her. But the hero replies that everything is going well. He casts a fire spell and directs it at the golems. Meanwhile, Lily protects his back, fending off the attack with a wind blade. From such powerful blows, the golems fell apart, not even having time to get close to the guys. When all the golems had fallen, Igni and Lily decided to remain in a defensive position and observe the situation. Seeing that no one seems to be attacking them, the hero concludes that this is the end. Lily, also looking at the remains of the golems, says that there weren't that many of them. Suddenly, Lura approaches them and, smiling wryly, remarks that the hero and the girl have done well. Then she asks when they became so close. Lily immediately becomes embarrassed and begins to blush, asking what she means by close. Suddenly, someone's voice speaks to Lura and makes her freeze in horror. A voice came from the direction of the horse-drawn carriage, asking why they had not destroyed them. The hero is greatly surprised by the human voice coming from the carriage, as he hadn't known anyone was there. Iris also begins to worry and glances at Igni. Suddenly, the single surviving stone golem stands behind her and prepares to attack her. The hero notices this first and starts shouting at Iris to run, while she only has time to turn around. However, the blow doesn't reach her face, stopping just centimeters from her eye. A voice from the carriage asks her to look at it. He says that if the golems aren't completely destroyed, something like this might happen, as the monster crumbles into sand. Igni notices that the man destroyed the golem with just his mind and is quite surprised. Lyra puts her hand to her chest and apologizes for this incident, although the hero sees that no one has managed to move from the spot. Suddenly, a female voice from the carriage noted that Igni wasn't at all frightened. From her intonation, it was clear the person speaking from the carriage was a little surprised. Then the girl asks Igni to come to her and show her his face, but Lyra replies that this cannot be done and says that they have almost arrived in Richilia. But no one listens to her, and a voice calls out to the girl, asking her to open the door. This causes her to turn pale, and sweat begins to pour from her forehead. At this time, Edward stands next to the guys with his eyes wide open, while the wary hero begins to suspect something. While Lyra, with a serious face, fulfilled the voice's request and opened the door. Igni began to wonder, could this really be that weapon? A beautiful girl with a ribbon over her eyes emerged from the carriage. Her ears revealed she was an elf, but despite this, she smiled at the people. The story shifts to the conference room. Alicia arrives and Alina asks what's wrong, as students rarely come to school on weekends. The girl sits down at the table and says that her sister sent her a letter asking her to return home. Alina puts her hand to her face and asks if she's sure of her decision. She then adds that Alicia recently had an unpleasant incident with Celia, asking her to reconsider. But she closes her eyes and calmly replies that everything is fine. She says she's already resolved the conflict with her sister and is about to add something else. Seeing that the girl began to hesitate, Alina smiled amiably and clarified what she wanted to say. Alicia says there's something she must do, then quickly gets ready and leaves. Alina is left sitting alone in the office, thinking about how strange this assignment is. She remembers that nothing special is planned for the duchy and looks up. Looking at the ceiling and thinking about something, the teacher says that she has a bad feeling. Meanwhile, in the forest, the protagonist learns of an important shipment that was being escorted to the city and meets a strange girl. Looking at the calm elf with her eyes covered with a ribbon, Igni wonders, is this girl really that weapon? She sits very close to him, making him wary. Sensing his tension, the girl apologizes and explains that since her eyes are blind, she needs to sit closer to him. Then she turns to him, a friendly smile appearing on her face. The girl says that she can now see Igni. He keeps looking at her and realizes that the name suits her. The hero thinks that the girl is truly worthy of being called a weapon, looking at her large breasts slightly covered by clothing. He notes that her body is relatively small, yet still impressively proportioned. Igni calls the girl a big-breasted loli while she sits quietly, unsuspecting. He recalls another conversation with his grandfather. The hero told him that he liked short girls with large breasts. Hearing this, the grandfather is horrified and beads of sweat begin to trickle down his forehead. At that very moment, he cries out, asking the hero what he said again. Then he waves his hand and begins to deny it. Grandfather says that a hero should have fought evil, not sided with it. But he fends off the blow and strikes back. Igni replies that it's not evil, while Grandpa is in shock. Then the old man, taking a few steps back, asks if the hero has completely lost his mind after all his training, at which point Igni concludes he's completely forgotten something. He says that lowly girls and large breasts are, at first glance, complete opposites. But then the hero adds that when these two things come together, they create something beautiful. Judging by Igni's face, his grandfather clearly misunderstood these words. The hero says it's downright tsundere-like, since together they bring out each other's full potential. He's so determined to prove this to his grandfather that he frowns deeply and clenches his fists. For a moment, the grandfather stands there, his hand outstretched. His mouth is open, beads of sweat are pouring down his forehead, and his whole body is shaking. But then he recovers from the shock and exhales with some hesitation, while the hero looks on with slightly frightened eyes. Grandfather closes his eyes, turns his head away, and admits that he cannot believe that the time has come when Igni taught him something. Then their argument ended against the backdrop of sunset on an empty road surrounded by stone hills. The hero realizes he's forgotten what it means to be young. He glances at the girl again and can't believe that there is a big-breasted loli sitting in front of him. She turns to him and asks his name. The hero gives his name. The girl recognizes him thanks to this information. The girl then reveals that she was the one who called him, and Igni is very surprised. He asks her again, thinking it was Lyra. Then the elf decides to introduce herself and says her name is Clara. The hero realizes she is an elf named Clara and becomes thoughtful. Suddenly, it dawns on Igni that a pillar of a sword is sitting in front of him, while the girl says that she is glad to meet him. The hero explains that Clara is a sorceress who is incapable of using magic. He suggests that there's probably no one in the world who hasn't heard of her. Igni shakes Clara's hand and decides to ask her why she needs him, addressing her formally. Then the girl smiles sweetly and admits that she likes the hero, and he suddenly screams in surprise. Clara then asks if it's true that Igni can't use any spells except fireballs, and he replies that it is. The girl puts one hand to the other and says that she and he are similar, confirming that she feels it. Then they begin to smile, and the hero realizes that the first step, called finding something in common with the girl you're interested in, has been successfully completed. Igni thinks his time has come when suddenly Clara cries out that her time has come, and Lura takes note. Although the girl with her eyes closed announced this rather calmly, the other elf took it completely seriously. Igni exits and the carriage door closes. Clara manages to tell him they'll see each other again, but then she's lost to hearing. Suddenly, the boys standing behind the hero nervously shout his name. This makes Igni tense and turn around, his eyes uncomprehending. Iris and Edward rush to him and ask if he is hurt and if everything is okay. Igni distances himself from them and says he's fine. He then explains that Clara is a perfectly normal girl, but Iris cries out that she doesn't believe it, as she felt a strong thirst for blood then. Edward nervously looks away and says that he would never have thought that the elven weapon is one of the pillars. But Iris exhales heavily and admits that there is nothing surprising about this, after which the guy begins to look at her. The girl regretfully explains that both the kingdom and the empire often use people as weapons. Edward folds his arms and the hero is surprised and asks if this is true. Igni realizes that if he thinks about it, it also applies to Alicia, remembering her standing in her hat in a pool of blood next to the lifeless body of a man. Suddenly, Lura comes up to the boys and calls out to them, causing Iris and Edward to turn around. She folds her hands together and closes one eye. The girl begins to smile awkwardly and says she hopes they can keep what happened a secret. The boys smile and the hero's face even begins to blush. Edward says they'll keep everything, of course, and Iris suggests that if they spill the beans, all the countries will be hunting Clara. She then adds that this girl's bloodlust is simply incredible, and Igni confirms that the countries do have a reason to hunt Clara, recalling her large, barely covered breasts. Hearing this, Lura breathes a sigh of relief and thanks the boys for their understanding. But suddenly Iris decides to ask why they were moving so slowly back then. Then the elf explains that if someone found out about their cargo, the task would become much more difficult. She then adds that on top of that, Clara can't use magic, and Igni, looking at her with his wide eyes, concludes that this is probably the main reason. Lura suggests the boys continue on, no matter what, and informs them that once they reach the duchy, their task will be complete. The boys and the girl agree, following behind the carriage. After some time, they reach brick walls, and the chariot drives inside through the open gates. The boys arrive in the city and emerge into a crowded square. There, Lura tells them they'll have to split up. The girl explains that she and Aina will deliver the weapons to their friends, then adds that they'll most likely spend the night there. Lura then asks Lily to rent a room for the boys and herself, to which she agrees. Having received a positive response, the girls and the cart leave, saying they'll see the boys tomorrow. Afterward, they find a building with a sign that says "Inn" and go inside. When they approach the reception, Lily rents several rooms and asks the hero to leave them in the room and then go to dinner. Suddenly, a happy Iris jumps on him and announces that she wants to share a room with Igni. Lily frowns and asks her to repeat the question. Then she stands between the girl and the hero, pushes them apart with her hands and says that this is not allowed, because boys and girls should sleep separately. She immediately grabs Iris by the hand and, burning with shame, insistently asks her to come with her. When the girls enter the room, Iris falls flat on the bed, complaining that she is very tired. Lily, trying to be quite stern, says that they can rest a little and then go eat. Iris suddenly becomes interested in something and asks why she's being so rude, but the girl replies that she's not rude at all and doesn't understand why Iris would think that. Then the girl lying on the bed explains that she just thought that Lily looked really cute, the way she smiled. Hearing this, she freezes, standing in front of the mirror and thinking about what was just said about smiling. Iris sees her frozen, so she gets out of bed and asks what happened. Lily nervously tells her that nothing's wrong and says she's had enough of this idle chatter. She asks if Iris knows how many people are in the taverns at this hour. Then the girl leaves the room and, closing her eyes, discontentedly asks the other to catch up. but suddenly she opens her eyes and sees that she is standing in the doorway directly opposite the surprised hero. Igni is a little surprised by this meeting and asks if he scared the girl, extending his hand towards her. Lily immediately assumes a closed pose and her face begins to flush. The girl turns her head away and says she wasn't scared at all. At that moment, she notices a strange feeling. Igni suggests she wait for his friends outside the hotel and she reluctantly agrees. The hero glances at Lily, who is shyly trying to look at the floor and her heart is beating quite hard. They go outside to wait for their friends and stand close to each other. Igni folds his arms and Lily clasps one hand in the other. Suddenly, the hero addresses her, causing her to jump and ask what happened. Igni asks if the girl knew about the weapon, and she replies that she did, moving closer to him. Lily admits she knew about this and explains that Clara loves to sleep. Therefore, she concludes that Clara slept most of the way. The hero takes this into account and wonders what awaits them tomorrow. When he brings this up, Lily becomes a little wary. The protagonist closes his eyes and explains that they will meet the Duke tomorrow. Only then will their task be complete. Lily listens attentively to Igni at first, but then her gaze changes and she realizes something. The girl says that the hero is right, after which he admits that it sounds a little sad to him. Lily asks if he really thinks so, feeling awkward at the same time, and the hero tells her that of course he told her the truth. At that moment, Iris and Edward approach them, joyfully greeting Igni. He also begins to wave while Lily turns away, trying to understand what she's feeling right now. The next day dawns and the story shifts to the duchy. The boys enter the great hall, after which Lily steps forward and stands before the man sitting on the throne. Then the wary hero stands behind the girl and mentally tells her that they met the Duke. After this meeting, very soon the guys return to a large city, surrounded by a fortress and built up with large buildings. Walking along the road, the hero notices Lyra and Clara walking. The former tries to support the latter while the latter asks her to slow down. Looking at this, Igni thinks that Clara doesn't quite look like a pillar right now. Suddenly, she turns to the hero and asks if he's free. He's a little surprised but says he doesn't seem to have anything to do. Meanwhile, Lily quietly follows them, observing the situation from behind. Then Clara politely asks Igni if he could take her for a walk around the city, and he suddenly frowns. He begins to think she's asking him out on a date. But just when Igni is about to agree to the proposal without any problems, Lily suddenly, unexpectedly for herself, shouts out that this is not possible. The surprised hero and Clara turn around, and the latter asks why she decided so. Lily turns her head away in embarrassment and says that she thinks it is very dangerous, hesitating at first. Clara doesn't understand the danger and reminds him that she's a pillar. She then folds her arms and adds that, besides, Igni will be with her. Then Lily begins to worry even more and tries to somehow object to the girl's arguments. But suddenly Lyra comes up behind her and, smiling sweetly, says that Clara is right. So she asks Lily not to worry and reassures her that everything will be fine. Then she becomes sad and starts whining. The hero thanks Lyra and tells her he'll be back before evening. After that, Clara curtly and discontentedly suggests that he go. She then tells the hero that he doesn't have to behave during their walk since, after all, on dates people should communicate freely with each other. Realizing it's a date after all, Igni beams with joy and asks where they're going. However, the girl replies that she'd rather trust him. The hero reflects on the fact that Clara's eyes are blindfolded and therefore can't tell if she's attracted to anything. He tries to remember what girls like and is extremely nervous as this is his first date. Suddenly, a thought comes into his head and Igni twitches and bulges his eyes wide, looking as if he had been pricked with a needle. Fired up by the idea, he invites Clara to go and they find themselves at a cafe. The hero and the girl sit down at a table with an umbrella and order food. Igni tells Clara that there is a plate of fruit and honey in front of her now and asks her to help herself. The girl tries the dish and says that it is very sweet. Then she smiles and adds that she likes it, and the hero replies that he's very happy about that. But suddenly, Clara accidentally tips the spoon with the food and the honey spills out onto the table. The hero notices and points it out. Then he tells the girl that Clara spilled the honey and she thanks him for his attention. But suddenly she grabs his hand and sticks out her tongue, bringing Igni's hand to her mouth. She manages to lick his finger. The hero pulls his hand away and says that his hands may be dirty. He's very embarrassed and Clara apologizes. She admits she didn't mean for the hero to get his clothes dirty. The girl says that the dish was very tasty, looking at the almost licked clean plate, and Igni replies that this is good. Then the hero gets up from his chair and asks what they will do now, and the girl thinks about it. But suddenly a girl starts approaching from their table, apparently having met Igni by chance. Coming a little closer, she realizes that she has indeed met the hero and begins to run towards him. The girl throws herself into his arms, despite the fact that Igni does not understand what is happening. He tries to push her away somehow, but she suddenly raises her head and glances at his face, saying that it really is him. Tears begin to well up in the girl's eyes, and she says that she misses the hero very much, calling him by name. Meanwhile, Alicia is busy with her own affairs. She explains that her family asked her to return home, but this request was presented as a task. And since the girl is going on a mission, Yuri was sent with her to help her. Judging by the boy's appearance, he's in great discomfort and turns to Alicia. She immediately turns her gaze in his direction and asks what's wrong. Yuri pulls down his collar and asks if he really has to wear clothes like that, to which the girl replies that he absolutely has to. But the boy points out that these are women's clothes, and Alicia says that's the point. She then explains that people are usually very receptive to two women traveling together. That's why, she says, a guy should look exactly like that. Seeing her frowning face, Yuri becomes embarrassed and surprised, after which he asks if this is really true. However, he then says that people would treat him the same way even if he wore men's clothes. Then Alicia realizes this and, scratching her head, admits she hadn't thought of it at all. She says the guy can change in the next town, and he starts to cheer. But then he asks the girl what's going on and asks her to tell him about it. Yuri assumes, judging by Alicia's expression, that something serious has happened. She takes out a document and explains that she received a letter asking for help, but the guy tries to read it and says he doesn't understand anything. Alicia explains that's normal since it's all written in code, and then tries to explain what the letter says. The girl says that the letter says that she must interfere with the saint, and Yuri suddenly becomes wary. Fear and surprise begin to appear in his eyes as he asks if Alicia should really interfere with that saint, but she frowns and says she's not thrilled about it either. The girl then mentally explains that the saint is a girl who has the unique ability to cleanse lands contaminated by the filth of the demon world. A disgruntled Alicia admits that she would gladly have stayed at the academy, and a frightened Yuri carefully asks why they are now riding in a carriage. The girl explains that this is because the task concerns not only the saint, but also the hero. Then Alicia showed a note containing information about the groom, Igni. It stated that he had been exiled from his family and currently had no last name. However, it was also known that Saint Rose was currently traveling to meet her groom. By this time, Rose had already managed to meet the hero, completely unexpectedly for him. She grabbed his hands and told him she'd missed him very much, calling him by name. Igni frowned and tried to pull away from the unfamiliar girl, but suddenly he realized her voice sounded quite familiar. The hero pauses for a second and wonders, is it really Rose standing before him? Hearing this, the saint's smile widens and tears well up in her eyes. Igni continues to look at her, remembering what the girl looked like in the past and comparing her to her current self. Then he remembers that her name is Rose Ackerman and that she is his former fiancée. She clenches her fists in joy and cries out that she always knew they were connected by the red thread of fate. The hero doesn't understand and asks what red thread she's talking about. Rose folds her arms and closes her eyes, recounting how she's been searching for Igni for so long and rejoicing in finally finding him. She believes it's all thanks to the power of their love. The hero recalls that she seemed to have always been so active. A memory suddenly pops into his head of how he sat quietly under a tree and did not bother anyone. Suddenly, a happy Rose appeared from behind a tree and called out to Igni, thereby frightening him. He was surprised by her appearance and expressed it verbally. Rose decided to approach him and ask if he had escaped from the mansion again. The hero responded with displeasure that one could say that and asked in return what she was doing here. Then the girl sat down next to him and told him that she wanted to meet him, and Igni was clearly very surprised. A little embarrassed, he looked away and decided to ask if Rose needed anything from him. But in response, she smiled broadly and said that she didn't need anything since he was her dear fiancé. Then she asked, "Isn't that so?" The hero began to blush and move away from her. Suddenly, the girl opened her eyes and realized that it was time for her to go, and Igni's face changed. Then the girl started to leave, but stopped for a second to say goodbye to the hero. Igni also waved back and didn't notice how his grandfather suddenly approached him from behind. He called what happened a disgrace, and the hero suddenly became frightened, hearing a sudden voice behind him. Grandfather said that there are a lot of girls in the world who are much better than her, but Igni replied that she doesn't need to become as popular as he is. Then the hero added with an important air that, after all, he does have a fiancée. He admitted that he felt like Rose loved him. Grandfather asked him if he was sure because he thought that she liked the feeling of love itself, at least for now, but Igni was very surprised by this and worried. Rose closes her eyes and puts her hand to her face, repeatedly repeating the protagonist's name. He is slightly surprised by her behavior and becomes stunned, wondering, has she always been like this? The girl remarks on what a wonderful day it is, then adds that it's also the perfect day to hold their wedding. Hearing this, Igni suddenly shudders. He apologizes and explains that he was kicked out of his family. The hero carefully tries to convey that he doesn't think they can do it. However, this doesn't upset the girl in the least. She puts her hand to her chest, smiles, and says she knows about it. Igni then asks why she needs him, and Rose says that she thinks it's obvious. She explains that she came to the hero because she loves him, looking at him with a pitiful gaze. Igni immediately frowns and tenses, unsure what else to expect from her. Suddenly, Rose grabs his hand and pulls him close. She tells him that's why she asked him to bring the hero, looking at him wide-eyed as he goes into shock. Igni remembers Clara standing behind him and decides to ask her if she knows Rose. The elf replies that he was right and tells the girl that she arrived much faster than she thought. Clara begins to feel a little sad and admits that she wanted to enjoy their date a little longer. Rose is a little surprised and asks the elf again about the date, while Igni tries to find what to say to justify himself. Suddenly, the girl becomes very upset and says that they agreed that Clara and the others would bring him to this city, and reports that she does not remember allowing them to go on dates with Igni. She's about to add something else when suddenly another thought occurs to her, causing her expression to change. Rose says she understands everything now and approaches the hero. A confused Igni asks the girl what she understood, and she, with complete confidence, assumes that the hero was simply practicing before his date with her. Rose then becomes even more convinced that this is true and says that Igni has no need to communicate with other girls since he only needs her. The girl is absolutely delighted with what she's imagined, and the hero decides not to argue. She tells him she understands as they haven't seen each other in so long after all. Rose convinces the hero that he shouldn't resort to such extreme measures as she loves him just the way he is. However, she immediately informs him with empty eyes that romances with other girls are now forbidden for him. Then Rose falls in love again and tells the hero not to worry as she will make sure he'll never need another girl again. Igni is shocked again and asks her again. Suddenly, she casts the Holy Shackle spell and he steps aside, trying to ask what it even is. Rose, seeing that nothing worked, screams and asks why he dodged, almost crying. Igni realizes she's clearly not all there and tries to calm himself down. He asks her to keep her cool and remain composed. Then the hero points his finger at the girl. He says he's not the type to chase girls because it's the girls who chase him. Rose suddenly goes into shock, puts her hand to her chest and freezes. The only word that manages to escape her lips is his name. But then the girl suddenly changes again and begins to admire Igni, talking about how cool he is. Seeing this, Clara concludes that love is blind, and the hero admits that this reaction flatters him greatly, even though Rose isn't quite right in the head. Then the elf decides to tell Rose that she's already brought Igni, as they agreed, and announces that it's their turn. The overjoyed girl agrees and says that with Igni, she can move mountains. Suddenly, the whole essence of the situation dawns on the hero, and he cries out, asking them to stop, and asks what kind of agreement they had. Rose approaches the hero and asks if he knows what element saints possess. A confused Igni assumes they possess some kind of holy magic as the girl walks close to him, holding his hand. She says the hero is right, as holy magic is the only element capable of cleansing the filth of the demon lands. He pauses and repeats her words about cleansing the filth. Igni reflects on how, over the years of living in the demon lands, he'd somehow forgotten that ordinary people could live there. He frowns and recalls how, toward the end of his training, he could kill monsters even in their sleep. The hero explains that the demon lands contain a vast amount of magic, causing the monsters living there to undergo strange mutations. If left unchecked, the entire world will become demon lands. He says that this is why Rose, being a saint, must cleanse certain places from pollution. Igni begins to stare at the girl when suddenly Clara decides to speak up. She says that this corruption is rapidly spreading across the elven lands, but then she adds that if nothing is done and everything is simply left as is, then this will also affect people's territories. Judging by her words, that's why Clara and Rose made a pact. The elf would bring you, and in exchange, the saint would cleanse her homeland of filth. Then the hero understands what's going on and says the girls could have just told it like it is from the start. Clara admits she was afraid Igni would refuse to go. However, she wanted to tell him about it when they were alone in the carriage. Then the elf adds that, besides, the hero isn't the type to abandon others in trouble and asks him if that's true. Igni doesn't know what to say and decides to hum questioningly. But Clara still tries to get an answer out of him, saying that's what popular guys do. Rose turns to Isshin with a smile and confirms that he's the coolest person in the world. He feels a little awkward, so he proudly lowers his head, asking them not to exaggerate. Rose becomes a little sad and begins to act childishly, tugging at the hero's clothes. She casts a pitiful glance at him and, almost tearful, asks if he'll go with her and Clara. Igni recalls that one of the key ways to gain popularity is to save a girl in trouble. Right now, there are 2 such girls standing in front of him. The hero pauses for a few seconds, wondering what to say, then agrees to stay with them until they finish. Hearing this, Rose's eyes widen in pleasant surprise. Then she throws herself into his arms and confesses that she can't believe they'll actually be together. Judging by her expression, her happiness knew no bounds, and she says, smiling broadly, that she's very happy about it. Suddenly, Rose steps back and takes his hands in hers. Wide-eyed, she informs the hero that she has the carriage ready so they can set off. The girl offers to come with her without further delay, but Igni wants to slow down a bit and asks if everything is so immediate. But then Clara says that he has nothing to worry about and promises to tell his friends about it. She approaches the cart and, smiling sweetly, wishes them a good journey, preparing to send them on their way. When Igni and Rose get into the carriage and it starts to drive away, he manages to see Iris. Standing near the gate, she looks after the hero with eyes full of incomprehension. Then the girl decides to go to Edward and, screaming, tells him that Igni left the city in some carriage. The boy sitting on the bench is very surprised and asks her what the hero could be thinking. Iris denies any idea. However, she does say that before Igni left, she saw him talking with Clara and another unknown girl. Suddenly, someone else approaches the guys, perhaps already knowing about the hero's sudden departure. It was Lura. She approached the boy and girl and reminded them that she had asked them to wait for her here. Iris gives her a look of disdain and wariness, and beads of sweat begin to trickle down her forehead. She then turns to Lura and admits that she feels like she's not telling them something. The elf freezes for a second, trying to think of what to answer, and suddenly her face changes. She smiles broadly and asks Iris why she's making such a scary face. Lura explains that Igni simply went on another mission, waving her hand dismissively, indicating that it's no big deal. Then she says that in the end, the hero himself agreed to this and explains that he will be brought as soon as his task is completed. Lura smiled again and added that therefore, the boys had no need to worry about anything and were heading back to the academy, placing her hand on her chest. While a very serious Iris listened to her, someone else approached them and announced that Igni wouldn't be returning. Lura smiles a little and, not seeing the person who said this, asked him a question: what is this sudden change? However, that person turned out to be Lily. She had a very serious and frowning look, which showed that the girl was clearly angry. She puts her hand to her chest and addresses Iris, then approaches the boys. Then Lily turns to Lura and, folding her arms, says she's had enough of lying. Lura begins to justify herself, saying that no one is lying here, but the elf screams, again asking her to stop lying, while the rest of the guys do not understand anything and just observe the situation. Lily says that Igni was indeed taken away and explains that it was the sword pillar and the lady saint who did it. Hearing this, the boys are shocked. Edward frowns deeply, disbelieving what's happening, while Iris, on the contrary, raises her eyebrows and asks again about the saint. Then Lily, with a very serious expression, explains that until the taint of the demon lands is completely removed from their world, Igni will not be able to return home. Lura puts her hand to her forehead, hiding her face. She admits she doesn't know what came over the girl and asks if she's really decided to betray the elves. Lily, of course, replies that she had no intention of betraying anyone and turns her head away. But then she clenches her hand into a fist and is about to object. The girl puts her hand to her chest and, frowning, says that she is not going to deceive Igni since he had to make his choice himself. Lura notices this unexpectedness and admits that of course she wanted Lily to become friends with the hero. But then she looks away and adds that she just didn't think Igni would become too dear to her. Suddenly, she extends her hand forward and casts some kind of spell, causing 3 magical threads to shoot out of her palm. The threads begin to surround the boys as they try to understand what's happening and avoid them. However, the threads restrict their movements and bind all 3 of them. Despite the hopelessness of the whole situation, the guys are still trying to escape, while Lura says that everything will be fine if they don't resist. However, before she can finish speaking, she is suddenly distracted by a wind that suddenly blows out of nowhere. Someone who summoned the wind uses the air blast spell, which knocks Lura aside. She manages to look up and see Alicia and Yuri flying through the air on a broom. After being released, the boys head into the forest to find shelter and find out what is happening. There, Alicia is told that the true purpose of their mission is to hand Igni over to the saint so she can take it with her. The girl repeats this again, and Iris says she understood correctly. Suddenly, Edward interrupts the conversation and asks why the hero needed the saint at all. They explain that Igni and the saint are childhood friends and that Rose, moreover, is obsessed with him. Iris lowers her head and realizes that they were simply used, while Lily decides to simply remain silent. Then she lowers her gaze and says she understands that they are all good people. Lily explains that the taint of the demon world began to spread across the elven lands, and that's why they couldn't hold out. Hearing this, Edward and Iris decide to raise their heads and look at her. Lily apologizes to everyone and asks Yuri if everything will be okay with Lura. The guy carefully raises his hands up and says that of course everything will be okay with the girl. Yuri explains that he merely blinded her with his magic and reassures the boys that he didn't use any violence. Meanwhile, Lura sat behind him, her body shaking and shrouded in dark magic, constantly repeating that she felt dark, cramped, and scared. Edward watches all this and remembers that one shouldn't judge people by their appearance. Then he asks what they should do, and Alicia replies that they are, of course, going to take him back by force. She explains her plan, which involves catching the carriage on her broom, and asks Yuri to keep an eye on the rest of the boys. However, she is interrupted by Iris, who tries to stop her. She says that Igni made this choice himself, and that is why he went with the girls and did not stay with the guys. Then Iris, trying her best to restrain herself, adds that the hero went not with just anyone, but with the saint herself. Although the girl doesn't know the full extent of the demon world's filth, she's certain she shouldn't act this way. But Iris is suddenly interrupted by Alicia. She asks Iris to calm down, as she thinks the hero is just a fool. The girl assumes that he probably didn't think before going with them, and that later he will pretend that no one asked him anything. Iris starts shouting that she's being completely serious, but Alicia replies that she's not joking either. Lily simply stands aside and observes the situation. Yuri starts to giggle a little. Iris notices this and asks if he's going there too. Then the guy stops laughing and apologizes. Yuri says that he felt that Alicia described Igni perfectly and thinks that she trusts him 100%. The girl doesn't agree with him on everything, but she still decides not to deny it. Iris is very surprised by this and wide-eyed asks them again. Then she rushes to prove that she actually believes in the hero too, since he is, after all, Igni. Alicia covers her ears and tells the girl that she doesn't have to scream. Lily concludes that they're quite friendly, and Edward replies that they are, in principle. He explains that they all became friends only thanks to Igni. Then Alicia suddenly grabs a broom and announces that she will soon return and bring a hero with her, while the guys just have time to watch her go. At this time, the carriage had already driven away, not far from the city. In it, Rose continues to hug him, while simultaneously rejoicing that they are together again. Clara notes that the saint is in a good mood, and Rose replies that this is natural, then asks how she can be sad when Igni is around. She says that the hero is her destiny, but this surprises him and he decides to take an interest. Then he smiles awkwardly and carefully suggests that everyone chooses their own path, hoping that they are not mistaken. Then Rose clasps her hands and becomes delighted, causing sparkles to appear in her eyes. She begins shaking the hero from side to side, asking Clara to look at him. Rose asks, "Isn't Igni beautiful?" In response, Clara admits that she's even more convinced that the girl truly loves Igni. She then turns to him and informs him that he is speaking the right words, but the saint's fate is truly predetermined. Then the hero asks the question, "Isn't Rose doing this of her own free will?" But Clara replies that it is not at all. Clara says that holy magic, which is the strongest form of water magic, does not appear so easily. The elf says that besides, Rose is an S-rank saint while leaning on his shoulder. Clara says there's a belief that God himself granted her this power and therefore her destiny is predetermined, and Rose is obligated to follow it throughout her life. The hero is surprised that this extends throughout his entire life, and the girl confirms this once again. Igni then asks if Rose is okay with this, but she replies that she is because it's her destiny. She then adds that she must help people. The hero understands that from the very day he was kicked out, Rose was always alone. Suddenly, the girl wants to say something else. Rose says that this means that Igni will stay with her forever and is very happy about this. He is quite surprised and asks if it really will take his whole life to complete this task. The girl is touched by this and says she would never have forced him. That's why she was so happy when he personally agreed to go with them. Then Igni realizes what he's got himself into. Suddenly he wonders why didn't they ask him then? But then the hero realizes something. He thinks about how Rose dedicated her life to cleansing the world of filth, abandoning everything she held dear. Besides, all this time, all she needed was Igni, someone she could rely on. Then he wonders maybe he should continue traveling with Rose. However, he is not entirely satisfied with this either. Suddenly the carriage starts shaking, and the hero asks what is happening. Rose says she knew they would be interrupted as Alicia circled the carriage. Igni looks out and recognizes a girl flying on a broom. He's very surprised and asks where she came from. In response, Alicia says she came to save him. She flies closer and adds that although Igni is strong enough to escape knowing him, she expects him to do more mischief. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by Rose. She shouts at her not to dare come so close to the hero. The saint places Alicia in magical shackles, and she is amazed at such power. Rose says that she understands that no one can resist Igni's charm and calls him dear. However, the saint then adds that she alone should be his bride and decides to erase Alicia's memories. At this moment, the hero stops her. He grabs her hand. The young man explains that Alicia is simply his dear friend. But Rose says that this is no good and asks him to move away, otherwise she will not be able to erase the memories. Igni realizes that the girl is not listening to him at all and begins to feel a thirst for Clara's blood. He remembers that the demon lands are very close and that he has a ring of empowerment. Then the hero decides he can definitely do it. He uses the Big Bang. After this, he notices that time has apparently stopped. Then the hero stands in front of Rose and asks her to listen to her. He tells her that he will not go with them, which makes her very upset. Igni says that he has friends whom he cannot abandon. But the girl suddenly asks if he really misses only her, since they are connected by fate. In this case, the hero creates a fireball in his hand. Rose sees this and cringes, wondering if her Igni no longer exists. However, after a few seconds, she finally decides to open her eyes and sees an outstretched hand before her. Igni asks her to take this flame in his place and holds it out to her. The girl fulfills his request and brings herself fire, admiring the warmth and tenderness of the flame.